Vice Mayor Filseth. Councilmember Koo. Chair Scharf. Councilmember Tanaka.
Here.
3 present in the room and 1 over the phone.
Great. And these are for oral communications?
I believe the top one is.
All right. Okay, one's on action and protocol.
Yes.
So, Nielsen, welcome.
I'd like to make a couple of very quick comments. One is an observation and the other is a request. I have participated enough hours here, I feel comfortable by making an observation that the way the budget's put together is almost impeccable. The only thing I notice in it that concerns me is that vacancies are rolled over, and that creates a false bottom line. It works out fine as long as there's a steady diet of turnovers during the year and that there's prolonged vacancies. I'm more concerned from what I hear in general from human relations executives in the Valley is that many executives for key spots are staying open longer and longer and longer. Part of the labor demand problem. The other part is that every organization is finding that their future employees are less and less willing to commute and fill those positions. I say that because I'm acutely aware of vacancies in the transportation section. One vacancy has been since March, and then Josh has been gone since however long Josh has been gone. That does create sort of a false security in the bottom line, if it's enough other people like that. I have a request on behalf of residents in the downtowns, California Avenue and University Avenue. We'd like to work with the committee itself, or Ed, if you want to assign somebody in finance to work with us independent of your time. We'd like to have a better understanding of the staffing that's going to be coming up for the transportation section, parking and traffic, and also the 3-legged stool projects that are in the budget this year or next year. That's a prelude to the long-promised stakeholder group that Rob DeGoss wants to pull together for neighborhoods. We're partially okay with that. Rob advanced that thought some 6 weeks ago. We're making no progress on what's the intention. We get wind of it. Part of it we don't like at all. And one way to address that is with Rob, but I know he's been very busy. But anyway, that's a sort of a mildly festering issue. We in the downtown RPPs don't see any congruence with Southgate, College Terrace, or even Old Palo Alto, which is bidding for its own RPP. And I'd like to get ahead of that game as early as possible. And the Finance Committee wants to do that directly or indirectly, but it inevitably comes back to dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. You're on.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Harriet Richardson, City Auditor, presenting the results of the annual financial audits. So the City Charter and Municipal Code require that my office coordinate the city's annual financial audit, and Macias, Genie, and O'Connell is the current auditor, and this is their 8th year. We have David Bullock here from MGO to answer questions regarding their work. So as I go through this, you've got a lot of things here. What I'm going to do is kind of refer you to what the pages are as well as the packet pages, because I think that will kind of help you if you want to make note of that as I go through. I'll just kind of go through the list of things and then talk about quickly about their findings before turning it over to MGO and ASD to talk specifically about the CAFR. So what you have with you today are independent auditors' financial reports on the city's financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018. That's the CAFR, the big book that you have here. And the independent auditor report is on pages 1 to 3 of that, which is after the Roman numeral numbered pages. If you're looking at packet pages, it's packet pages 93 to 95. You also have the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements performed in accordance You also have the independent auditor's report on compliance for each major program and on internal control over compliance required by the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal rewards. This is also known as the single audit report. That is on CAFR pages 175 and 176, or on your packet pages 267 and 268. Then you also have what we refer to as the small reports. You have the report to the city council, which is also known as the management letter. That's packet pages 6 to 15. And then you have the cable TV franchise independent auditors report and statements of franchise revenues and expenditures of the cable TV franchise for the years ended December 31st, 2017 and 2016. That's packet pages 16 to 22. And then you have the Palo Alto Public Improvement Corporation annual financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2018. That's packet pages 23 to 37. You have the Regional Water Quality Control Plant independent auditors report and financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2018. That's packet pages 38 to 47. And you have the independent accountant's report on applying agreed-upon procedures related to Article 13B appropriations, which is also called the GAN limit, for the year ended June 30th, 2018, and that's packet pages 49 to 74. So the good news is that the auditors gave clean opinions on all of the financial statements, which means that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects regarding the revenues and expenditures. They also found that the 3 audit findings that they had last year had all been the recommendations have all been implemented, so those are cleared. But as stated in this year's management letter, they identified 2 findings. The first one is a significant deficiency in internal controls over financial reporting related to how the city allocated expenditures for a grant for the sludge dewatering and loadout facility project. So this grant was partially funded by partially federally funded and partially state funded. And when they realized that they didn't need the full amount of the grant and reduced the amount, they had allocated some of the costs to the state grant that should have been allocated first to the federal grant. So they had to do an adjustment for that, and that was the audit finding. The auditors recommended that ASD collaborate with other city departments on how they can strengthen their internal controls over financial reporting and compliance. I would like to mention that in August, I did some training for people in departments, mostly senior management analysts in departments who manage grants. So it was on the internal controls, the federal standards for internal controls, so that they would understand how the grants work and how they are supposed to manage those funds. That was well attended, was about a 2-hour training, but you can never have enough training on internal controls. The second finding is a control deficiency in internal controls over purchasing card disbursements. And this was about they found that some card holders had exceeded their monthly spending limits, and they recommended that the city look at their P card guidelines and update those as necessary and document when they increase spending limits so that those authorizations are clear. So I'd like to thank David Bullock and John Waller and their team from MGO for their hard work in completing this audit, and also Kylie Noze and her team, Rima, who stepped into this process partway through the audit for their work on helping MGO complete the work on time, and more importantly, for the work they do all year to ensure that we get clean financial statements. So David is here from MGO, and ASD is here to answer questions you may have regarding the audits and the comprehensive annual financial report. Okay. That takes us through item 1. There's kind of an overlap between 1 and 2 the way we do this. So
We're going to do 2 separately when we ask questions about the CAFRA.
yeah,
And you have a separate presentation on the CAFRA or not?
they do.
They do, okay, that's what I thought.
How do you follow up on your, whether the management is following, is compliant, and that they're doing it accordingly and well?
Okay, so you're referring to the, let me speak here.
To the two items that is on, with regards to the grant funding and for the SWRCB loan, as well as to the
Sure.
P cards.
Okay. This is David Bullock, partner at MGO, and in response to your questions on the findings, so you're referring specifically to the
Yeah, so
to the single audit in the back, right? Pages
5 and 6.
pages 5 of the
The
management letter. I
deficiencies,
got it.
right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you make the recommendation, they make the response, do you do a follow-up?
We do,
to
yeah.
ensure
So
that?
yeah. So next year, what you'd see is a status of prior year findings, and so next year when we come out, we'll take a look at the corrective action that was taken and ensure that that was followed through, and then we'll give you a status of what that corrective action was in the following year.
And the P cards, do they not have a limit to where it just cuts off spending?
So
I mean, I
it's-
see it's 15,000, but then,
So the policy is 15,000, but it also allows ASD to approve higher limits. It gives them the authorization to do so. And so of the sample that we tested, some of those that were over the 15,000 had an email distribution where we could follow, and it was approved before the purchases were incurred. However, there were 3 instances where we didn't find that record.
okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
Chair Shaw, yes.
Any other questions? Eric? Nope. Greg?
Yeah, I have a question. So for the expense card, how much, you said that people went over, how much did they go over?
Going off recollection, probably somewhere between $300 to maybe a couple $1,000.
Well, I guess I'm just referring to maybe as a percentage. Like, what is their limit? Is it like their limit's $300, they went over $300, or is the limit like, $50,000, they went over $300?
So the spending limit per the guidelines is $15,000. And in the instances where the purchasing is getting close to the limit, the cardholder will seek authorization to go over that $15,000 limit. And so there were 3 instances where we couldn't find, or the staff at the city could not find the paper trail authorizing that spending over the limit.
I see, okay. And so there's only been 3 instances of that, is what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. And
Okay.
and
And how many,
we selected a sample of 25 purchases, and we probably weighted it more towards the larger spending statements.
okay. And when you guys looked at it, right, were the purchases legitimate, or did they look like they maybe weren't properly authorized, or shouldn't have been approved, or shouldn't have been spent?
We did not see any inappropriate purchases that we could tell from reviewing the statements. It appeared that they all were for legitimate city purposes.
Okay.
Is that it, Greg? Greg?
That's it.
right.
That's it.
I'll move that we approve that we accept the audit of the City of Palo Alto's financial statement as of June 30th, 2018, and, and the accompanying reports provided by Marshes, Ginny, and O'Connell LLP. All right, any further discussion?
Second that, please. Thank you.
Eric? All in favor? Greg, are you voting yes or no?
I'm voting yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. All right, now on to item number 2. Discussions and recommendations to approve the fiscal year 2018 comprehensive annual financial report. known as the CAFR, and approve the budget amendments in various funds. Staff report?
Thank you, Chair. Kylie Noze, Interim Chief Financial Officer. Today we have Rima Lobo with us. She's our new finance manager who's overseeing the accounting
Welcome.
division. I think, have you even hit 6 months yet? Not yet. Didn't think so. So she's going to present the CAFR today, and so what we were actually hoping for is if we could get through the presentation, given the different arrangements that we've got, and then we'll do questions afterwards. Great, thank you.
So good afternoon, Chair, members of the council. I'm Rima Lobo. I'm the new finance manager. I joined the city in July. I'm here to present the fiscal year 2018 year-end financial report and the comprehensive annual financial report. I'll walk you through some financial highlights. The total combined government fund balances were 251.2 million. They were up by 16.5 million from fiscal year 2017. Only 21% of, or 52.8 million, is unassigned fund balance and available for spending. The city's total long-term outstanding debt is 141.2 million, an increase of 5 million. 53.2% of the debt is for governmental activities and 46.8% for business type and enterprise activities.
Just for context, that 5 million is obviously a net figure, but the driver for that is the new golf course debt that was issued back in 2000, or not 2000, May?
2018. Yeah, May.
May, yeah. You're good, so go ahead.
Okay. The city also implemented GASB 75, accounting and reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions. That's the OPEB. The net liability was 153.5 million, 71.3% for governmental activities and 28.7% for business type activities. Here you have a slide that shows you the 2018 general fund summary, attachment A. I'm going to go through and tell you what each of those the general fund summary caption or the headings means. The adjusted budget equals to the adopted budget plus budget amendments approved by the City Council plus prior year encumbrances. The allocated charges equal to the cost allocation plan for administration and support provided by various administrative departments. For example, facilities management, the ratio of square footage may be used to allocate facility management charges. The encumbrance and reappropriations. These are funds that have been reserved when a purchase requisition is finalized or a project was not completed in a given fiscal year, and funding for the project is moved to the next fiscal year for completion. The actual revenue and expenses are the total of the sum of all the columns highlighted in yellow. So the general fund budget to actuals, tax revenues. The revenues exceeded final budget by $7.6 million. Some of the highlights are $2.3 million higher in documentary transfer tax, mainly due to strong sales activities. 1.7 million from charges for services due to higher than anticipated receipts for the development center, and 0.9 million higher from sales tax.
And just to orient us all to the graph, the purple bars are the revenue budget. So this is what was the budgeted estimate for FY18, and the green bars are what was actually collected. And so for the most part, you can see they're in line with each other. Obviously, documentary transfer tax, the revenue outpaced staff's projected revenue collections this year. So in this graph, you would want to see the green outpacing the purple. You will want to see the opposite on this graph.
And the next slide is for major departmental expenses. The expenses include encumbrances and reappropriations. The expenses ended the year at 5.7 million, lower than budget. And this was due to police that had a savings of 1.5 million, mainly due to salaries and wages and unused paid leave. Non-departmental, 0.9 million due to unused contingencies. Development services, 0.6 million due to salaries and wages, and other departments mainly due to salaries and wages.
So we threw this slide in here a little bit because there have been some questions both as part of the long-range financial report as well as just general conversations about what our tax growth has been. And so what we actually did is pulled up a view on OpenGov, our web platform that is accessible publicly. So we can kind of see and pivot the data, and so anyone can go in here and play with it. And the view that we're looking at specifically is the history of revenues in the general fund. And we can go back on this platform as far as 2009. And you can see decent growth over the past few years in this specific depiction. Obviously, if the committee or public wants to go look at additional historical information, this is all readily accessible information.
So the next slide gives us a status of the budget stabilization reserve for 2018 and then for 2019. The general fund stabilization reserve as of June 30th, 2018 was $52.826 million, or $52,826,000. In FY19, uses of the 2018 surplus are, some of the examples are, the FY19 approved uses of $1.7 million, and some recommendations for budget amendments, $3.3 million for development service fees, and $5.5 million for fire services settlement payment. So the current projected FY19 BSR level is $42.3 million.
And so on this slide, this is the report laid out, about 11 million higher than estimates that were used in the FY19 budget. And just the variance to that is, obviously, we developed the 19 budget about 6 months ago, and so we're only getting this data now. So we're a little bit off, but not too far off. But the biggest message out of that $11.5 million difference is really there's only about $1 million that wasn't earmarked for other things. So that's probably less than 0.5%
Can you explain
difference.
the development services fees reserve?
Sir, could you turn the microphone on?
Yeah, so development services fees are 100% cost recovery activities. So anytime revenues would exceed expenses, we would want to earmark those funds and make sure that we've accounted for them appropriately. And so there are fluctuations from a business model that Michelle can talk about further, that we would use these funds only for expenses associated with development service activities.
So does that imply that we might have overcharged by 3.3 million for it and we have to give it back? Is that what the
No, it does
reserve is?
not. That's that business timing difference, and Michelle can discuss that further.
So there are two factors that we're doing an analysis of in development services. Michelle Flaherty, Deputy City Manager, and also Acting Director of Development Services. So in my second hat, we're in the process of doing a deeper analysis of this amount in these fees. But what our preliminary analysis shows is two things happened. One is we changed our fee structure, and so we're watching that to see whether or not it is accurately reflecting the cost for services or whether it needs further tweaking. But the other thing that happens is when really, really large projects come in, we take the deposit at the front end, and that project may take several years to construct. So the revenues are coming in, and then we're billing the expenses against that over an extended period of time. So we need an accounting method to set that money aside so that it can be billed against as the project moves through the process.
So you're anticipating that that 3.3 million, a lot of it will be used to pay future accrued expenses?
That's correct. We had some extremely large projects come in this year, and we believe the bulk of it is from that. I just can't, today, I can't give you the percentage of how much is from that percentage and how much is the change in the fees. And that's the detailed analysis we're in the process of completing.
So the enterprise funds highlights, as you can see, there were favorable changes in acquisition for wastewater treatment, refuse, and airport funds compared to the prior year. The customer revenues are up due to fiscal year 20. Customer revenue services are up in FY 2018 because two of the significant variables include approved rate adjustments and consumption too. The combined surplus increase of 11.4 million in fiscal year 2018 is mainly due to wastewater treatment, refuse, and airport funds. Wastewater treatment had a negative RSR of 12.9 million due to the carryover budget for plant upgrades. The RSR will be restored as replacement costs are recovered from partners and loan proceeds in future years. Airport has a negative RSR of 2.9 million due to operating losses in past years, which was funded by advances from general fund. And electric funds have a negative net position, and this amount has not changed from last year. Mainly the rate increases have helped but both the revenues and costs have increased too. So the staff recommends that the Finance Committee forward to the City Council for its approval amendments to the fiscal year 2018 budget, appropriation for various funds as identified in Attachment B, Exhibit 1, and various capital projects as identified in Attachment B, Exhibit 2, and the city's fiscal year 2018 comprehensive annual financial report. It's Attachment C. So, the end of my presentation.
All right, great.
I had a couple questions. One is on the TOT. Am I reading this right? I'm looking on packet page 58? This chart? I mean, you break into the sort of the, steady state, and then the contribution from new hotels, and then the contribution from the new 2% increment, right? And it looks like 25% of the total TOT receipts came from new hotels. Am I reading that right?
The 4.6 million?
That's the one.
So 4.6 divided by, are you doing it divided by 24.9?
Yeah.
If that math works out, then yes.
Is that really true? Because we didn't have 25% more hotels in the last year, I don't think.
So these are not just the new hotels in the last year. So what these are the hotels that the council by policy had dedicated the revenues from to go towards infrastructure.
And we made that policy back in 2013 or 14?
Something like that, yeah. many years ago.
So it's hotels in the last 5 years, 5 years, which
Five or
is,
four.
so we had a 25% hotel growth in the last 5 years?
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
So you have the older hotels which have,
You're
you have
making-
older hotels which have the lower room rates.
Yeah.
So the brand-new hotels tend to be more luxurious
yeah, okay,
hotels
all right.
and have higher room
You
rates.
got the Clarence out here, okay.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. There were very specific hotels that,
Okay.
Chair Sharp is right, there are very specific hotels that were dedicated towards funding the infrastructure plan. And so this is representative of those revenues. And then obviously the all hotels 2% is inclusive of the base plus those new hotels. And that was that 2% increase that was approved in 2015, I think, 14?
Yeah.
14 or 15?
I think it's 15, but.
15, somewhere around there.
Cool. Next one is you said that we came in $1.5 million under budget on police, and it looks like we went over, we're slightly higher, like almost the same on fire. And there's a note in there, it says it's because of vacancies. Is that really true? If there's vacancies, we spend more money? The overtime comp is that much?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
That is the short answer. But I would say to attribute the entire overage to vacancies would be an inaccurate statement.
Okay.
Our fire department has been doing a lot on strike teams.
Yeah. Although I saw a note that we got compensated for that, and that's included in that.
We do receive compensation for that, but you'll see the full expense happen on the expense side in the department.
Okay.
But there's revenue coming
Shows up
in
in
to
the revenue.
offset part of that.
Okay.
And that's something that we can do a better job of being clear on. In the actual budget transaction, we probably should have recognized the revenue that was specific towards strike team.
Okay.
It's a few $100,000 actually
It
for
was,
last
yeah,
year, given the significance of our support.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, it was a pretty large number, I thought. So, okay. And then on packet page 71, if I can find it, sort of looking at, there's a, I'm sort of looking for the big ones in here, and there's an $833,000 adjustment for debt service payments on a 2002 park and garage bonds. How is it that we get a incremental $800,000 charge on a 16-year-old bond issue? Can you explain that?
You can give us a moment and we can. Let's come back to that one. And I've noted it and we'll follow up as part of this conversation.
Okay. And my only other question is out of curiosity. So we got $140 million of debt, including the $5 million from the golf course and so forth. What's the average interest on that we pay?
It would depend on the debt
I know, but
that
it
is
probably
being.
varies by-
Yeah, it varies by issuance. Most recently, our golf course debt was under 4%, right? Was it 3 and change? Yeah, our golf course debt, the most recent debt that we issued was 3 and change.
Is that pretty typical for the rest of it, too?
I would have to look at
Okay.
the individual ones. They've been issued throughout,
Depends on when it's issued, right?
Correct.
If you issued it now, it would be closer to 5.
correct. There's a chart actually with the years that they were all issued in, which is a good indicator of kind of price based on where the economy was at that time. We could find that information for
So
each
we-
of the individual issuances. But it's on your CAFR,
Of course, I
page
should know
77. Thanks, Christine. So when you look at this, you can see it significantly varies.
that. Considerably.
Yes. Depends on the type of debt that's being issued and the timing of it. For example, things like state water resource loans, by nature, those are intended to be low-cost lending options, which is why we have to apply for them.
Okay. That was all mine.
And I think
You-
Steve has an answer on the
On the,
parking.
Steve Guagliardo with the Office of Management and Budget, responding to the Vice Mayor's question about the $833,000 payment on debt service that was issued back in 2002. So back in April 16, on April 16th of 2018, we actually refinanced that debt as part of the golf course configuration as well.
Okay.
And so this is the refinancing of that. You can see right next to it, part of the revenue being recognized associated with that as well.
Right, that's the 595,000. Right. And is the 238,000 below that also part of it?
So I can address that. The difference is the cash that was on hand. So there was a reserve account for the bonds. So the cash on hand was 237,000.
Right.
So the cash plus 595,000 of the new bonds covered the refunding
Covered
of
the
the
refund.
parking bond
Okay.
debt.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka, are you still on the phone? No, okay. Just note that Councilmember Tanaka left the meeting. Councilmember Koo, do you have any questions or not?
No, but I'm just blown away by the 500 and the sidewalk repairs. It's a really huge number, but no questions.
All right, so I had a couple thoughts, I think, and maybe a couple questions. So, let's see. So now we don't have a quorum, so we'll just wait till you come back. I'm still here. You can go get what you're gonna do and then come back. We could, I mean, and if you're getting a drink, get me one. Yeah, I want a crystal thing, whatever. Preferably like lemon or, you know. Thank you.
In spirit.
In spirit. All right. So,
Spirits in that case.
so I think if you look at packet page 57, you can see the increases in our property tax, our sales tax, user utility tax, transit occupancy tax, and documents transfer tax. And this is really the taxes that drive our increase in our budget and fund the services we need and frankly fund the cost of living. And I guess I wanted to point out a couple things. One, the saving grace always is that we have Prop 13, and so there's always a property tax increase as things sell. And that basically forms the basic reason why we can always assume that we're going to get more money. To some extent, it'll offset other losses, pretty much. I mean, in a recession, we lost like 20 million bucks. I can't say always, but for the most part, that's what stabilizes it. You can see that sales tax actually doesn't go up that much, right? I mean, and I think that's sort of to be expected over the long term. And in fact, I think that's probably the most variable. And when you have a recession, the utility users tax is an interesting one because it's really, in some ways, we double dip, right? When we raise rates, we get more money on our utility users tax. So that really just shows, for the most part, and I asked you if it was a complete, but it's not. But for the most part, rates go up. We get more utility users tax unless we're expanding our consumption. So, on the other hand, when we tell people to conserve, as they should, on water, electricity, and gas, we get a lower utility users tax, and so that's offset by that as well. So that one, it's interesting, is almost as much as our property tax increase. And I think, given our efforts on conservation, I would assume that more of it has to do with rate increases than it has to do with a increase in the overall amount, but I'm not sure. I don't know if you know that.
Sure. So one thing to keep in mind under utility users tax is also that it's cable franchises as well. And so what we did is we modernized as an organization the utility user tax, which means we updated it for all the new technologies. And so
We did that by ballot. I remember we did that recently.
Correct. And so what we did is we broadened the base, modernized the franchise and utility
So
user
did we do that in
taxes.
27, when did we do that? Because it should have been, because this is the increase year over year, so if we modernized it 2 years ago, then the increase shouldn't.
Right, so we modernized it a few years ago, however, but as technology continues to evolve, as you have different services, you have different cable providers from that perspective, right? You've got things like Xfinity now, it's not just normal cable, right? You've got these,
Okay.
I don't know how to.
So I would
new
ask.
services.
So I would ask, I think it'd be helpful to the council in future years
Mm-hmm.
to break out the utility users tax into
do
the
that.
components of utility users tax and the cable franchise fees
we can
taxes,
absolutely do that.
which are really a separate tax.
Correct.
I mean, it really is, and we can track it separately. I think that would be helpful. Then on the TOT, I think it's really interesting that TOT revenues were up 1.5 million. I think we underestimate the effects of getting an extra 1.5 million here, an extra 1.5 million there. You know, $1.5 million is a whole 6.2%, which is, when you look at the increases on those things, that's actually a fairly high increase. And so there becomes opportunities to have hotels, there becomes opportunities to, you know, I remember we had a dealership opportunity back in the Baylands, which was, you know, probably about $1.5 million at the time, and we turned it down, which I think was on a 5-4 vote, which I think was one of the silliest things we've done. But it's those kind of opportunities that you miss that add up over time. And if you don't take those opportunities, you're not going to get the budget increases that are going to sustain the services that we spend. Because if you look at the rate of growth of spending on our budgets year after year, they're actually quite substantial. Our budgets are not flat. And then the documentary transfer tax, as far as I can tell, that is a random walk, right? I mean, it depends which big building sold or which didn't sell, or, you know, what happened. So I think that's probably really hard to judge what happens. So to me, that was sort of really, really important. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these charts. So if you go to page 60, I thought that that chart could be a really useful chart in telling us where increases are going on in different departments. Okay, so you have public safety, and you could see in 2016, we basically gave some big raises. That's how I read that. And you can see how when you look at this, you can see each department, how the changes are and which things. But then I asked Kylie about it, and Kylie told me that, for instance, that development services was part of planning, so that's why planning numbers are different. But also, wasn't development services part of public safety as well, parts of it? So it makes the chart less useful, because I can't go back and say what really happened, because and wasn't there also some part of public works as well? So, and I know we're going to put aren't we putting development services now back in planning? Yes. So, you know, if we're going to do charts like this, and I'm glad we are, I just think what you don't want to do is you don't want to give a false impression to council members. Because if I hadn't asked the question, I would have said to myself, yeah, we held the line on public safety costs really well, and then after 5 years, we basically had to give some raises, and that sort of makes sense. Whereas the reality is actually much more complicated. The reality is we moved money around. If I looked at this, I would say, boy, on our planning department, we're like starving our planning department. What are we thinking, right? And the reality is actually that a lot of the money came from development services, and there's actually been a large increase, I think, in what we spend on planning. But it's hard to see all that. So I would just request that when we do this, that what we try and do, and I think it goes to transparency and also for public officials to be able to make good decisions, is to be able to put it so that you don't get a false sense without asking the question. Because a lot of times you don't ask the question, you just look at this and you make assumptions based on what's in there. And don't take these as criticisms, because they're actually not. So I'll also say, I also asked Kylie the question about our airport. Because when I looked at this, I said to myself, wow, the airport's the biggest turnaround. And, you know, I wanted to know why we had such a real positive turnaround. And so maybe you want to tell people why we had such a big turnaround.
Thank you for the question, Chair. This is truly, you're right, looking at an isolated view of the net position of that fund in FY18. And so what happened in 2018 is the airport continues to do significant capital investments, and they do it through grants with the FAA. So about 90% of their capital investments are funded by FAA grants, 10% are cash from the city side, and they're on a reimbursement basis. So the cash flow is out of whack. So we spend the money first,
Right, then we
and
get the
then,
reimbursement.
correct, and we submit for reimbursement from the FAA. And so if you were
It's
to.
sort of like development services, right, in some ways, right? You spend the money, or you get the money.
Reverse.
Reverse, we
It's
get
the
the money,
reverse
then
of
we spend
development
it.
services.
Yes, the reverse.
Literally the exact opposite. And so actually, if you were to look on slide 8, you can see that net position of 10.1 million gain on the airport side. But if you look at their actual RSR, the reserve levels, it's negative, almost 3 million. And that's a reflection of the general fund loans that have been providing support, primarily for that 10% match for those capital projects.
And then the other thing I noticed, which I can't resist, is we just went and did a TOT tax increase. And during the campaign on the TOT, I kept hearing over and over again from the new hotel council, I guess, they kept sending out things, saying that their occupancy was falling, that this was not the time to do it, that raising the hotel rate would injure our hotels. When you look at this, the average hotel occupancy, it says, and if you go to packet page 57 on this, it says the average occupancy remains steady at 79%, while room rates increased by 4.6%. And I think that's the facts on that. And I think that's completely different than the message that was being sent out by the hotel industry. And I think it's important to look back at this and say, that's the actual facts. And, you know, I think it'll be interesting to see, and I think we should track it next year, you know, and obviously the economy plays a role in this. But, you know, did raising the TOT have any real impact on room rates increases or on occupancy levels? And
You're saying the city split the increase with the hotels?
a little bit, right? I mean, a little bit. What I'm really saying is that it was clear that raising the TOT was not detrimental to the hotel industry in Palo Alto. And I think that's an important takeaway from this. Because, you know, our hotels are actually a really important part of our economy and a part of everything, and we want to be careful when we raise taxes, frankly, that we don't injure our businesses. And then I guess the last thing I wanted to get to is on packet page 56. So typically what we do is we take the excess funds and we put them into our infrastructure reserve. And so one of my initial questions on this is, how much money could we put into our infrastructure reserve without hurting our ability to fund what we need to fund? And our normal rate is 18.5%, and I think that gives us, what, 3-point-something million left. And I don't think we should use the whole 3.3. I think that would be a mistake. I think we need some money for rainy day and that kind of stuff. So I was going to ask if you thought $2 million would be something that the infrastructure reserve could take without, you know, in any way harming our ability in the budget stabilization reserve.
Sure. I'm going to step a little out of line here since I haven't conferred with Ed or the city manager's
And
office.
Ed, feel free to jump in. I mean, I don't want to put Kylie on the spot. I mean,
I think we're fine.
Yeah.
We've had a chance to talk about this some.
On an ad hoc basis. But in reality, I do think that it would be fine to transfer probably $2 million from the reserve, from the BSR to infrastructure, which would leave about $1 million cushion in the BSR for any unanticipated needs over the coming 6 months of the year.
What would be the percent?
I'm sorry?
What would be the percent of, be like 19 and a quarter or something like that?
Less than that, it'll probably be like 18.7 or something. I can do the math, but it'll be above the 18.5, I can tell you that much.
and let me just say why I think this is important. I think it's important if you look at that, we've had a strong commitment, and I don't think we should end that commitment to funding our infrastructure reserve. I also think that in the short run, what it'll allow us to do is to not borrow as quickly. And so rather than spending the 5% that we would borrow the money at, we're in fact spending current money by moving the money. And in the BSR, I forget what we get on it, but it's nothing near the 5%. So I think it's a better management of funds to do it that way as well. So therefore, I would move that where was the one you guys wanted? I would move that we forward to the City Council for its approval to the amendments to the fiscal year 2018 budget appropriations for various funds as identified in Attachment B, Exhibit 1, and various capital projects identified in Exhibit B, Exhibit 2, and that we add that we move $2 million from the BSR to the infrastructure reserve, and that the city's FY 218 comprehensive financial report on Attachment C, that we forward that to the council for their approval as well. Okay. Any comments, thoughts on that? Councilmember Tanaka, is you back or no? Okay, I thought maybe he was.
Yeah, I'm back. I got disconnected. It was having some Wi-Fi trouble here. Sorry about that.
Did you want to say anything? Or any comments on any of this?
I missed a few minutes of the conversation, so I actually maybe more than a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes. So I don't know if maybe some things I was looking at that were been answered.
I'm happy to indulge you if you want to say what you wanted to say, and even if it's a repetition of what other people said, we'll live with it.
Okay. I think I'll just skip, just in terms of time.
Okay, fair enough. In that case, we're ready to vote. All in favor of the motion? And that, Councilmember Tanaka, are you voting yes?
I'm going to abstain because I missed some of the call. Sorry about that.
Okay, fair enough. So that passes unanimously with Councilmember Tanaka abstaining.
Just two things, Councilmember Phil Seth, or Vice Mayor Phil Seth. If we were to, or with the Finance Committee's recommendation of $2 million, the budget reserve BSR would be at 19%, so a 0.5% above the current target level. And then as we conclude this item, I just was noting it takes a village. So especially with all the turnover, a huge thank you to all the staff, especially David and Rima and Harriet and the budget team and the accounting team who's all here. Who jumped in to get this across the goal line.
Yes, I was remiss in that. I do apologize. I think you guys do a great work, and I do want to thank the budget team and everyone who worked on this, and our auditors, and thank you all for coming. I mean, you know, you're all here, so thank you very much for showing up.
This is what you get when you have daytime meeting.
I know, it's great to have you all here. No, we should do more of this. Exactly. All right, so now I think we're on to item 3, is that it? And thank you, Harriet, as well. You were.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Scharf and Finance Committee members. We're here this afternoon to talk about the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, and I think you probably know it was built back as far as 1934, and then the majority of it built in 1970. So we've discussed in the past that it's essentially most of it at the end of its life. We worked some years ago on a long-range facilities plan that council approved. That was in 2012. And now in line with that plan, we have some very significant capital expenditures coming up at the plant essentially over the next 5 to 10 years. So our item this afternoon, the primary reason we're here is asking for your recommendation to the council to approve a reimbursement resolution for potential upcoming bonds that will allow us to capture costs under the capital projects that are moving forward. But then along with that, since these are such significant expenses, we wanted to take this opportunity kind of outside of the regular budget process we do with you to review the overall capital program and then to put that in the context of some of the other impacts such as increases to wastewater rates that result. So we have Mabo and Jamie Allen and Phil Boble here, and Jamie's going to kick off the presentation.
Jamie Allen, Public Works Plant Manager. As Brad mentioned, the treatment plant was mostly built in the 1970s, and about that time, Mountain View and Los Altos joined in, and that's when most of the infrastructure that we're talking about today was built, and that's the infrastructure where we have 4 very important and very large capital projects that came out of that long-range facilities plan that Council adopted in 2012. These projects are in our near terms. We're saying near term is in the next 5 years. They're highlighted on this screen, but let me give you an overview of how the treatment process works. Let's see if I could use your mouse. Okay. That's not showing up.
Why don't you just get up and point, Jamie?
All right. Is that okay, the clerk?
Yeah.
If I stand up?
Better than, I'll speak up.
You're not going to have a microphone, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll just,
Here we go. Come over here.
oh, there we go. Okay, maybe I'll figure it out. So the raw sewage comes in right here at a lift station, and it goes through a 60-inch force main, pressurized force main into this structure here where primary treatment occurs. The sludge settles to the bottom, and scrapers push it to the end of the tank. It's progressively thickened and then burned in this building in the sewage sludge incinerators, which we're going to retire hopefully in the next half year. We're almost complete with our sludge dewatering and load-out building. The sludge will be taken away to Fairfield and Merced County for further treatment. After the primary tanks, there's 2 biological stages. The first one is in these 2 towers here, where it's fixed film reactors, and then in these large tanks are aeration basins. Both of these are given oxygen for microorganisms to break down the organics biologically, and the solids that come out of the secondary treatment are settled in these clarifiers, these 6 tanks right here. After the secondary treatment is advanced treatment. Similar to a drinking water treatment plant, there are sand and coal filters in here, and the water goes through the filters, and it takes out fine particulates. It's very clean water coming out of there, and it goes through large diameter pipes into this facility right here, which is ultraviolet light disinfection facility. It's a newer facility. We used to have chlorine gas. From here, after the pathogens, viruses, and bacteria are disinfected in a few seconds, it goes into a structure right here, and there's an outfall pipe, 54-inch concrete pipe that goes under the airport out to South San Francisco Bay. About a few % of our water is further treated in this filter and with chlorine, sodium hypochlorite for further disinfection and made into recycled water for use on golf courses and business parks, irrigation, things like that. The 4 major projects that we'll go over, the first one here is the primary sedimentation tank rehab. We're going to need to replace the mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, and upgrade the structures or recoat the structures so they don't fail in earthquake or from corrosion. The second project is the outfall pipe. It's a new parallel 57-inch diameter pipeline to go along with the 54-inch. The existing 54-inch pipe is not capable of conveying the peak wet weather event of 80 million gallons a day during a wet weather event at king tides and with also a sea level rise. So we need to be able to handle that event. The third project is these aeration basins being upgraded with new divided zones with better treatment equipment to replace the aging blowers and air diffuser equipment and subdivided into zones, and that will allow us to do everything more compactly inside the footprint of this tank, and we can retire these 2 tall towers right here, which were built in 1980. These were installed in 1972 with different kind of jet engine blowers installed over right in here, and they're at the end of their life. And the fourth project is our operations lab building. We think right in this area right here, and we would take our lab operations staff, regulatory and engineering staff from different buildings and put them all in the new building. Our lab is still outdated. It's they do 14,000 tests a year on the city's drinking water, recycled water, and wastewater. Okay. So the four projects, again, the two that are closer to being ready are the primary said tank rehab, which is at 60% design, and the outfall line construction, which is at 90% design. Those are ready for the first bond. And then the second bond is the secondary treatment upgrades in the ops center. And they represent $4.9 million in design and $68.1 million in construction. These are the schedules. Like I said, this primary said tank and outfall are closer to being ready. The others are a little bit further out. We've got consultants selected and on board for all of these. And so we're working on the designs are at different stages. These estimates that I showed you are preliminary estimates. Some are very close to being a construction estimate. Some are more early estimates. And we'll be refining those with the engineers as they go through their design stages. And so the funding options for the $70 million or so, there's two main options. There's the state Clean Water State Revolving Fund program, which is our preferred option because of the low interest rate of 1.9%. The other option is a tax-exempt utility revenue bond, whose interest rate is approximately 4.6 to 4.7% at this time, based on the timing of our bonds in the middle of 2019 and early 2020. We're preparing the applications for the state loans. The state is struggling to manage the demand on the state loan program because of the favorable terms and the low interest rate. They have $8 billion of demand and about $1 billion available per year is what they're targeting as a payout. So they're trying to manage that demand, and they're doing a policy update on that to try to develop a more transparent and fair scoring system. And they're going to once-a-year reviews of all the projects on the fundable list. We have put in our applications. We think they will do well, but we're not sure yet. But we'll know before we go before these bonds. We need a backup plan, and so the revenue bonds are something we're doing simultaneously with applying for the state loans. The one reason we're floating two bonds is because bonds have time limits in spending the bond proceeds. They want the proceeds to be spent within 3 years. And so by having some projects start a little later, we would issue the second bond to true up the actual cost based on those preliminary estimates being more defined. And so what we're bringing to you today, we need to declare the city's intent to reimburse certain soft costs, the pre-construction expenditures from the bond proceeds, and to allow reimbursement for expenditures incurred up to 20 months prior to the resolution adoption. This is especially the design fees. And you're not committing to issuing any revenue bonds at this time. This is part of the bond issuance procedure. You're not taking any irreversible action or action the city would regret. And once you approve, once this is approved by you, staff will take this recommendation to the full council. It's passing this resolution is a technical procedure. Should the city issue a bond, our bond council has recommended us to pass this resolution to reserve the ability to recover these soft costs under federal law. And so again, by voting to pass the resolution, the committee is not committing to issuing any bond, and you're not committing to awarding any construction contracts. And this is our timeline, again, middle of 2019 for the first bond and early 2020 for the second bond. And Phil, did you want to?
Phil Bowl, Public Works. I'm going to just summarize this slide and a couple of others. Thanks, Jamie. So what is the impact of these projects? As Jamie explained, you're not being asked to recommend to council to approve these four projects or the bond at this time, but we're using this opportunity, we hope you agree it's a good idea, to kind of go over first the projects themselves and now the financial impact. This is, of course, a 10-year forecast. We focused on the 4 projects which are in the first 5 years, roughly $70 million worth of projects. And then we include the next 5 years, and we've added another $40 million to that Jamie didn't summarize. It's one particularly big project to redo our headworks, kind of a placeholder. We haven't got started on that. It may not actually be our 5th project, but it probably will. Ideally, we'd actually be spending more than that in the 5th year, but when we looked at the effect on rates and the effect on debt service, and we went back and forth with our partners several times, it became clear that it was going to be a really hard sell to spend more than that $40 million in the second 5 years. And this graph will give you a sense of that as we get into it. We're going to spend a minute on this graph because, first of all, I need to remind everybody that now you're being asked to wear your hat as the steward of the sewage treatment plant, where Palo Alto is only 35% approximately of the total flow. The total capital money comes from Palo Alto in roughly that same amount, 35%, 1/3. Let's think of it as 1/3. And the other 5 partners of the sewage treatment plant, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, Stanford, and the East Palo Alto Sanitary District, are the other 65%. We're going to show you a slide later that deals just with Palo Alto and the impact on Palo Alto rates to the ratepayers. But this slide is the whole sewage treatment plant. It's not rates, it's expenses. So it's the expenses over a 10-year time frame of the plant. And to start to peel into it, you'll see for each bar, there's 2 percentages above the bar. And the lower percentage we'll talk about first. And that's the percent increase in expenses from the previous year. So, for example, I chose 2020 on the left hand, and then it shows the following year, of course, 2020, or did I say, I meant to say 2019 on the left, and then you can see that there's a 6.7 increase from 19 to 20. And that is the information that's really important to our partners, because then they turn around and compute the rates that they have to charge their people to pay their share of that 6.7 increase. So the expense increase for all the partners is about the same, right? It's this 6.7 for this particular year, going from 19 to 20. And that means that all the partners are going to pay approximately that same expense increase. So that's the way to view this chart. And when we did this, like I say, and went back and forth with the partners, we felt that this is about all that the traffic would bear. And you can see some sort of tough years in there. 22, the 4th bar from the left, is over a 12% expense increase. And we'll talk about why. The bonds, this graph assumes bonds. Jamie mentioned that we have these 2 main, well, really just 2 options for funding. The state revolving fund alone, good interest rate, 1.9. Bonds, worse interest rate, 4.6 to 4.7 is our current estimate. By the way, that's Taran's current estimate, and he's with us here in the front row.
Financial advisors.
He's a financial advisor, I see, and he's...
No, he's not. It's from our outside financial
Oh,
advisors.
okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. Well, it's through Taran. We look to Taran. He turns around and asks the world at large, and this is what we get through Taran. And he's here to answer any questions questions that you have for him. So, the first chart like this we showed the partners actually had a steeper incline even than this. Why? Because if you look at the orange and the yellow, that's our debt service. Orange is our current debt service, and the yellow is the new debt service that we would be incurring with these 4, now 5 projects that we've been talking about. The reason we have current debt is some past projects and the thing that we're finalizing now. Some of you have been to the sewage treatment plant recently and know that we're in the final throes of constructing the sludge building that lets us decommission the incinerators. So that's part of that orange. That project is almost done with construction. We did get a state revolving fund loan for it, which is good, low interest rate, but it's resulting in the increase that you see in the orange bar, the debt service, going from 19 to 20. So that building, you don't have to pay start to pay the state loan until the construction is complete. So that's going to hit us in 2020. And the orange gets bigger in 2020. That's the new building. Not one of these 4 projects we've been talking about because it's already approved and almost built. And then you see this yellow bar coming into effect in 2020. That's the impact of the bonds for the 4 projects we've been talking about, or at least the first set of them. And you don't see it's not easy to see the impact of the second set of bonds because we've done some smoothing there. And Tarn has helped us with that. And our partners were pretty big on this too. So we've taken advantage of several ways that you can that you can reduce the initial payments on bonds and spread them into later years. And Tarn can help us deal with those mechanical things that we've done if you want to get into that. So the yellow is spread between 22 and 23 are the bonds coming into effect, these 2 sets of bonds. And then later in the second 5 years, you see the effect of this 5th project that Jamie didn't discuss in detail, but we put it in here so that we can do a 5-year projection. So you see the yellow bar getting even bigger as we move into that next 5-year period because of this 5th project. And I'm spending a lot of time on this chart, but I think it's worth it. It lets you absorb those percent increases as I talk. Now let's deal with that percentage that's on top of the expense percent increase. It's in a kind of light blue box, and Mabo's got her little cursor, whatever it is, next to it. So another issue that comes up in addition to increasing debt service is increasing debt service ratio, a policy that council has where you put in the numerator the annual debt service and you put in the denominator the annual expenses. Some would say, well, that's the annual revenue. Well, for the sewage treatment plant, we always keep the revenue the same as the expenses. So our partners are paying for just costs. So regardless of how you want to think of it, it's a ratio between the annual debt service and the annual, let's call it budget. And we have a policy that council adopted some time ago that ratio should not exceed 15%. So that's why we wanted to show you this, is that in 2022, there Mavo's showing you, it goes over just slightly at first the council adopted policy of 15%. So it goes to 15.5%. And then it reaches a maximum with this set of assumptions in 2026 of over 18%, 18.5%. And then it starts to go down a bit because other expenses increase, and yet the debt service is not increasing at the same rate. So we're not asking you to deal with that issue now, but we wanted to highlight it for you because when we come back, assuming we do, with actual bond approval steps, we would also be asking you to either revise the policy or issue a short-term exception to it to allow us to increase that debt service ratio. And if you want to get into that, we can talk more about this whole debt ratio thing. All right. So, a lot of time on that chart, but hopefully it was helpful. Let's go on to the next one, Mabel. Now, this might be, hopefully, is sort of a familiar chart from 2 weeks ago when we had a study session on recycled water. And I just want to briefly point out, you might ask, well, wait a minute, where's all this recycled water stuff that you were talking about the other night? Isn't that a project or two at the water quality plant? Yes, it is. But it has got different math and different finances associated with it than this picture we just described. The fundamental difference is that the bottom part, if you remember, we used this strange acronym ERWF, which meant the relatively small reverse osmosis salt removal facility that we'd put in to make our current recycled water better, less impactful to redwood trees and sensitive species. That's a project we're have done the preliminary design on. We're trying to get the water district to fund most of it. And it isn't included in the graph that I just showed you. And I just wanted to separate those things for you. This would be paid for mostly by Mountain View and the district, and a smaller contribution by Palo Alto. And the math on it doesn't fit in well with what I described. And I just wanted to make that clear. And then the upper part, that other red arrow, is this regional transfer, which isn't part of the project mix at all that we've been talking about. So,
And the regional transfer again is?
that would be taking, if the water district has,
That's when the water district steals our water.
yeah,
I just thought,
yeah,
I just want to.
just to put a verb in there, that inflammatory verb. And Ed wanted to make sure that we gave you a very brief update on that. We continue, since we had the study session, we continue discussions with the water district, and the major thing to be negotiated still in front of us is, wait a minute, how does this work when they receive our water for approximately a 40-year period? How can we be sure that we have some access to water beyond what we currently have? If we're going to send half of the treated wastewater, which is approximately what it would be, from the treatment plant to another treatment plant, our current treatment plant, to a purification facility, and then on south, how during that period where that project is operating 40 years, how could we be sure that if we need more water here in Palo Alto of this type,
So
we
how
can
much
get it?
money is the ERWF cost to do?
16 million.
16 million. And Palo Alto's share was 16 million?
No, Palo Alto's share would be on the order of 1 million, maybe even less.
But that has nothing to do with the regional transfer, correct?
Not really, except that we would prefer it had nothing to do with the regional transfer. The water district has put both of these components into one agreement that they would like.
So It's $1 million. And we're
For
about to
Palo
borrow
Alto.
85. I mean, we could borrow $1 million more,
We could.
or we could raise rates by a little bit and fund it. It
Yeah.
seems silly to lock ourselves in any way over $1 million, which is, you know, I mean.
Lock
comparatively
ourselves
speaking-
into a bond amount, you mean?
No, lock ourselves into any sort of regional transfer over $1 million, right? I
Well,
mean-
like I say, I think the primary, Brad looks like he wants to add something. Go ahead, Brad.
Well, I was just going to add that the reason Palo Alto's share would only be $1 million would be because we would have this agreement with the water district whereby they would cover 80% of the costs. And at least currently in the discussions with them, they're tying that contribution to having the regional transfer.
So what would be without the regional transfer? What's the amount of money we'd have to spend if we're not willing to do the regional transfer?
More on the order of $4 million. Is that right?
Well, no, we don't have that figure. I think we want to plant the stake in the ground that they really, either way, with or without the transfer, they need to fund 80% of this, and Palo Alto should only be paying $1 million.
Fair enough. I'm just thinking we should be pretty strong that, at least, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I wouldn't give them the water. Obviously, by my inflammatory comment, you probably got that. But I wouldn't give them the water for 40 years. I mean, that's a really long time.
Right. And that's, you'll recall, it wasn't just you, it was essentially every council person at the study session said, basically.
Well, that was my recollection. That's why I said it.
Yeah.
I just,
Right.
the way the discussion was unfolding, I felt like we were still talking about giving them the water, whereas I would think that after the study session, you'd go back and say, we're not doing that. It's just not happening.
Well, we said it a little different way, which was, it's not happening that way without anything that we can do to obtain water during that 40-year period. And so we're wrestling with that right now. There's some ideas about how we can preserve our ability to have water during that 40-year period. And that's the crux of it.
And Phil, if I could add
Yeah.
just one more dimension, and you're really hitting the issue of the commitment of the water, what we refer to as the effluent, what comes out of the water treatment process. I think the water district is calling it influent because it goes into their additional water treatment process. But in any case, what we call our effluent. In addition to the question of committing that water to, whether it be the water district or some other long-term use, the real reason I think it was important for you to hear about this today is that we are putting this major investment into our wastewater treatment plant. And that affects the cost to deliver the effluent. Ultimately, the financing that staff is presenting to you today and future financing that we'll do for additional capital improvements at our own plant hit the rates for wastewater treatment. And ultimately, if we were to, say, make an agreement with the water district that the effluent were free, then that is a revenue source that would be foregone. And therefore, the only source of revenue to pay for the capital improvements would be the wastewater treatment, basically the sewer treatment, the wastewater rates that our residents and businesses and our partners pay.
Right, and I think you
That's the
said that
connection.
far more articulately but that's what I was leaning towards, was that I think over the next 40 years, this water will be a valuable commodity, which will allow our ratepayers to recoup some of that. And I'm concerned that we would basically give it away. And that's a separate issue of making money versus the issue which, Phil, I think you're talking about, which is making sure we have a stable water supply, whereas I view that as a possible revenue source. So I'm, and I agree with you, the water district should pay this, given that on our property tax bill, every year Palo Alto residents pay, and we don't get the same benefits that other people, and we send them substantial money, so yes, they should pay for this. But I don't think that we should, I think that we should be this is a 40, whenever we do something for a long period of time, I would hope that we think long-term. And in fact, I was thinking about this whole thing, and how nice it would have been in the 70s when they built this, if they said, in 50 years, this plant is going to need replacement. So therefore, we could do a small 0.25% or whatever it is on rates and take that money and invest it over time, and now we would sit on $85 million and be ready to do that. And so I'll let you finish your presentation, but where I'm going with that is I actually think that we should look at those and think about when is the right time to then start putting together a fund for the next generation, so in 50 years, people don't have this issue. And we also have other things coming up we don't talk about. I mean, sea level rise may or may not be something where we start having to spend money on, as well as these other things, and frankly, spending money on water purification and that. So I do think we should talk a little bit about the long term and think about this as with a vision.
Absolutely, and I do believe that the Water District has hurt us. They got mad at me for having this study session, frankly, because they hadn't done the same thing with their board yet, and you know how that goes. They like to be in control.
Well, you should say, well, Gary Kremen was there, so hey, they got their board
Yeah.
right to sit.
Exactly. But the good part of it is exactly what you said. We and they, through Gary, got to hear what you and the rest of council had to say about it, which was almost the same for every council person, is we may need this water in that 40-year period. So that's what we're working on with the district right now. Rest assured that we heard that there needs to be compensation, but separate from that, there needs to be a way that we can get water during this 40-year period. So we're working on that now. The district has put out some new ideas. We'd put out ideas a while back. We had said, hey, how about having a water for water arrangement during that 40-year period? Well, maybe we don't get this exact water, but you find some other water for us, district. So we crafted some language like that, which of course they hated because we were implying that they would guarantee to us that we'd find. So it sort of all boils down to the extent to which somebody's going to guarantee that we have either all of that amount or a percentage of that amount. The good news is that the latest thing the district threw out was, well, how about if we sort of guarantee you a smaller amount than half, you know? So I think that's where some of the negotiation is going to now occur. And when you see this again, hopefully you'll see a pretty good, much better
So let me ask
idea.
you a simple question. I take it. Is you're negotiating, but we've never had a council authority on what the parameters of negotiation are. I don't know how you're doing that. I mean, because, you know, you may think you've struck a good deal. You come to us and we're like, no.
Yeah.
And I don't know, then do you start negotiating again, or do you basically say the deal's off? I mean, so I think you run a risk of, I mean, it's hard to go a long way down a negotiation, because then the water district, if you spend the next year negotiating this, and council hasn't agreed, I'm not going to be on council, but I find it becomes really hard. It can really mess up a relationship, right?
So
I
we, at
don't
the staff
know.
level, we won't be doing that. We won't be agreeing to, frankly, anything much beyond the current structure that we have.
Well,
That-
but if you've crafted language, I mean, that's a pretty big
It's
step.
language in a term sheet, the Water District is calling it, which is essentially a broad outline. And so you saw the other night or 2 weeks ago, the first kind of step, you gave us feedback. Somehow like that, I'm sure Ed will ensure that
I mean,
we
I guess my
do
question
that.
is,
Continue that.
shouldn't there be closed sessions, basically, where we negotiate on this, where you, like labor, like you get direction
Well,
from
that's,
council?
it's an interesting concept. I believe at this point, we've concluded that it's not eligible for closed session. That said, one could argue, the only, I think the closest authorization for a closed session would be a real estate transaction, and it's not exactly a real estate transaction, so we're not quite there. But that said, I think we can talk to the city attorney's office about that. Would note that the water district did set up a framework of this joint recycled water committee, and it does include two of our council members, Councilmember Du Bois and Councilmember Wolbach, who have been a part of that. And so they are involved in the conversation, so can give us a bit of a reality check as that proceeds. Ultimately, to your point, though, it does need to come back to the full council.
I'll put on the council Wolbach is leaving.
Yes.
And I don't believe, with the exception of your study session, the council has had any updates or direction on this. So I don't know what the interaction between that committee and council is.
Well, quite frankly, this is going to be it, and it will, in a larger sense, the Finance Committee's involvement is really critical, because you're now looking at the financial implications of this whole, I was going to call it a food chain. It's not a food chain, it's a water chain of interactions between ratepayers in Palo Alto and what we'll be negotiating with the district.
Anyone else want to jump in? I always felt like I was dominating that a little bit. All right, you continue?
Okay. So the next slide is Palo Alto only, so you can switch hats again, and rather than be your steward of the treatment plant, this is the effect on the Palo Alto ratepayers, as opposed to the expenses to the wastewater fund, wastewater treatment fund, which is what the other thing was. Now you can see it's, as we look to the past couple of years, it's moved around a fair amount. The other thing that's true about this slide, let me get Mabo's notes here, is that it includes two funds, actually. The wastewater treatment fund is a separate enterprise fund from the collection system. And the utilities department manages the collection system. The Public Works Department manages the treatment plant. And then the two roll up together, highly coordinated effort, I assure you, with our utilities department to produce proposed rates for the ratepayers. And Eric and his group give you this every year in the spring, and it's a roll-up of those two funds into proposed rates. This is not those proposed rates. We're not ready, utilities is not ready to propose rates. What this is a prelude to that, where we do a run of utilities little model, which really just a spreadsheet, where we combine these two funds, and the only thing we've factored in here is, well, gee, what if we do these bonds and one SRF loan for that fifth project? What if we did those? What impact would that alone have on the rates? And I want to emphasize that because utilities wanted me to. It's not the proposed rates. It just shows one impact. Well, what's another impact that we might include between now and spring when you'll get the actual proposed rates? The other main thing that utilities has to look at is the reserves. What do we want to do with respect to the reserves? And some of this uneven behavior in the past has been because we wanted to raise the reserves. And in fact, that's what was happening between 18 and 19. That large increase that we had last year of 11%, Mabel has an arrow by it there, 2019 with an arrow, 11%, the largest increase that we're anticipating or that we've seen recently. That had a couple of factors. The Utilities Department desire to raise the reserves for the collection system, and then secondly, an increased activity for CIP projects, mostly from collection system. So this gives you a sense of what those, again, looking to the future now, which is 2020 is the first future year on this chart. You can see that the impact of these bonds and one SRF loan, new SRF loan, is going to be the 9% in 2020 and then lesser in the future. It's hard to tease out. You can't really tease out from this, staring at this chart, the differential impact from the treatment plant fund and the collection system fund. But those stacked bars give you a feel for that, because two of the four stacked bars, the two on top, the blues, are the treatment plant fund, and then the lower two bars are the collection system fund.
So when you model this, are you looking at getting the clean state water at the lower interest rate?
No.
Fund, or are you looking at the bonds over?
I should have said that, Greg, on the last stacked bar chart too, if I didn't, that we assumed worst case for the first 5 years, that we were going to have to get the bonds. And then for the second 5 years, we did assume the state revolving fund for the next one. We figured, well, let's do a compromise. We don't want to show the absolute worst case. And if we strike out on the state revolving fund for the first four projects, gee, they ought to help us out at least on that fifth one. So it's kind of a compromise the way we've presented it.
So it could get better.
Could get better than that, and Jamie feels, chime in here, Jamie, that one of those four projects, that outfall line, is because it's going to address sea level rise and environmental protection for our city, should be a better candidate than just rehabilitating stuff at the plant, which isn't quite as interesting to them as.
Aren't the incinerators being replaced too, or we already did that?
No, they are, and we did get the SRF loan for that.
I was gonna say, 'cause that should be something.
Yeah, they were very interested in that. In fact, they did the forgiveness, as they call it. They gave us a grant of
$4 million.
$4 million. So we had a $25 million loan.
29.7.
Oops.
It dropped to 25.7.
Right. So they actually said, hey, here's your loan. By the way, we're going to knock off $4 million of it and call it a grant because we like this project to get rid of the incinerators, lowering the greenhouse gases. And that could happen again but it's not too likely with these purely rehabilitation projects. Okay, so that's primarily what I wanted to show you. And then the last slide is sort of a feel-good slide. And when Councilmember Philseth saw this, an earlier version of this last year, he said, oh, I understand now. You've got the lowest, Palo Alto's got the lowest sewer rates in the universe. We're not sure that's true, but we are, in spite of all this activity, these are current rates. So, but we know that these San Mateo County cities that are listed here, and Hillsborough on the far right-hand side is the worst of the lot. We know that these folks have not only had major increases in the recent past, but are going to have more because they're going to have to rebuild and are rebuilding their sewage treatment plants too. And they got started a little before us. You could argue we delayed this longer than we should. That's one argument. Or you could actually argue also that, hey, we were the penny pinchers. We didn't start this as early, and so far we haven't had any horrible consequences of not doing that. We've had a lot of breakage that we've briefed you on in past years, but frankly, nothing horrible has happened as a result of those, except a lot of our staff had to work nights and weekends and they get compensated for that. So just wanted to say that, because we usually get asked, I don't know if Councilmember Tanaka's still on the line, but the usual one of his main questions. Yeah, one of your main questions, Councilman Tanaka, is usually, how does this compare with other cities? So we show this chart as far as the. Okay, so I'm done. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you for that presentation.
He has them. Yeah, he has them.
All right. Anyone have any questions? Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Philseth?
A couple.
Hey, this is Greg. I have a few questions.
Okay, you want to go first?
Sure. So yeah, thank you for having that comparison chart. I just want to make sure we're looking at apples to apples comparison. So, does this include the CIP cost, or is this
size, right? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you just fine.
I'm doing like a feedback loop. Okay. Anyways, so what I'm wondering is, if we factored in all of our capital costs that we're spending beyond the rates that we're charging our customers, would our rates still rank like this? So that's what we're saying. What I'm saying is, if we look at the full expense of the capital cost plus, but this is just looking at it from the ratepayers' point of view, but it's not looking at it from the total cost point of view. And what I wonder is, if you look at it from the total cost point of view, does it still look like this? So I'm referring to the green and blue chart on monthly single-family residential sewer rate survey.
Yeah, good question, because that is the current rates, as near as, I think it's pretty good, apples to apples, in terms of the current rates. What is, we don't have information on is, what are the future expenditures that all of these sewage treatment plants anticipate, and what impact would that have on their rates? We've given you an impact on our rates. That was the slide previous to the one you're talking about. But we don't have equivalent charts for other people about what they anticipate in future years. Our best estimate is, as I was saying a minute ago, is that these people aren't done. They've got a lot of rehabilitation. San Mateo, for example, has announced it's got to completely rebuild its sewage treatment plant. So we don't anticipate this compare to our reversing itself.
Just to clarify those, I'm sorry, Phil, that our rates do include capital as well as.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I don't think I was clear on my question. What I'm asking is, I understand it from the rate point of view, and I assume that this is apples to apples comparison. You know, I did wonder why it's just, for instance, just winter rates, but whatever the case is, I assume that you guys tried to make it apples to apples comparison, and December is a fair sample point, right? But so assuming all of that, what I'm really asking is, I'm trying to think about it in total cost, right? So total cost is our capital expense that we're investing, plus the rates that the ratepayers are paying, right? So there's actually, because I think right now this chart here is only looking at what ratepayers pay, but if you think about the total cost is the capital that we're investing in it, plus what the ratepayers are paying. Isn't that the right way of looking at it?
Well, you can look at it that way, and that's why we put the stacked bar back up. What slide number is this? He can't see it?
He can, he does have all those slides.
So we put slide number what back, up, Mabel? Well, it's 9. It shows the expenses for a 10-year forecast for us. So we do have that. It does include both capital and operating.
No, I guess what I'm asking for is basically like the same kind of comparison chart you have between cities, but looking at it from a total cost point of view, not from a ratepayer point of view, but from a total cost. So like the total, if you factor in the capital cost and you factor in the ratepayer, right? So it's kind of like a fair comparison across all the different cities.
This is Brad. I would just add that all of these entities' rates need to include the debt service on their capital costs if they're not doing the capital work as pay-as-you-go. So I would say that the rates we showed are apples to apples and include all the costs.
So are there no other transfers in from other funds? So are you saying that everything, these sewer rates is paid purely through the rates, and the same thing happens for all the other cities as well?
I don't think we've done comprehensive audits of the rates, but it would be typical that enterprise funds that are subject to Prop 218 would recover all their costs through the rates.
And
But we don't transfer any money in from any other fund.
that is correct. We do not have a separate capital fund. The capital expenditures in the wastewater collection system are charged back to the rates.
Okay.
Okay, Greg, are you done?
Yep, that's all the question I had.
Councilmember, Cook. Oh, I thought you were next.
So the 4 million that you said, it's already been forgiven. It says here is expected to, so it's been forgiven already.
Yeah, it's very definite.
And then,
And we have the actual cash, we have 3.4 million of the actual money, right, Jamie?
that's always good. Yeah, I can't find it right now, but I know I read it. And somewhere it says how much Los Altos, Mountain View, and Palo Alto pays, and what is their reimbursement, or what they're going to be contributing towards the rehabilitation of all of this. Why is Los Altos so low?
It's mostly their population and their lack of much commercial base. So, you know, compared to,
They do? They don't have much, right? So it's mostly their residential.
in Los Altos Hills, if you were thinking of them, is even lower because
Lower.
they only have one thing that you could call a commercial facility, the junior college, right?
Okay. But they're not part of the partner.
They are. Los Altos and Los Altos Hills are both partners.
Okay, thank you.
Just real briefly, so you're asking us to approve a resolution declaring the intent to reimburse expenditures, right? Do we have any other options than approving it? Right? It sounds like, you know.
Well, it's a good thing to approve this. You have the option of not approving it. It wouldn't be the end of the world if you
So what
didn't
happens if
approve
we don't approve it?
Then, sure.
Well, I think by not approving it, you'd be either making an assumption that the state revolving fund loans will come through, which we're hoping they will, and we're simultaneously essentially applying for that. Or you'd be saying that these projects aren't important enough to commence with at this time.
So why is that?
Something to that. It also means that we would use our pay-as-you-go approach to pay for the design of the projects. We wouldn't add to the bond amount the design funds. We would just be going after the construction funds, but not construction and design. So we would reduce the total bond amount.
So that was my understanding, that if we said no, that means you'll use current funds as opposed to basically pre-borrowing the money and then reimbursing yourself out of bond funds. Right? I mean, isn't that the...
Now, we try to. I can't guarantee you that that's going to work. But, yeah, we...
Wait, you lost me on that.
Well, like Brad said, it's just a question of these soft costs, right? That's the only thing we'd look back at. Soft costs being...
Actually, that's not been my experience in this city. My experience has been that it's soft costs and staff salaries that we reimburse ourselves for. That we basically say to ourselves, how much did our staff spend on this? And then we reimburse the general fund or whatever based on that. We do allocated charges and stuff. So that's what it seems to me to be. So
Well, it really doesn't relate to staff costs, and we
Okay.
could get into that. I was trying to differentiate soft costs, meaning design, permitting, CEQA, from construction costs, which is the big bucks, which we can't do pay-as-you-go on.
No,
That's-
clearly not, right? So, I mean, but that's the question before us, right? And what you're really asking us is, well, I guess there's two questions. By passing this resolution, are we automatically agreeing that that's what we're going to do? Or are we just setting it up that we have the authority?
You can
to
do it.
So we're providing an option.
Right. So it doesn't mean you have to do it. We'll be back with more detail on what to do exactly with these bonds. You're just putting the stake in the ground that let us go back for 2 years. It
But let's
doesn't
have a
require
brief
we go back.
discussion about why we should do it. I mean, what, if we spend the money now, how much is it? What does it look like? How does that affect the funds?
Okay.
I mean, that's,
We can do that as long as you realize we're not making that decision now. We're not making the decision whether to spend it ourselves or put it as part of the bond. We're not making that decision now. You're just making the decision that it's possible to do it. Under state and federal law, you have to take this action if you want to be able to roll those soft cons into the bond. We're not saying we're definitely going to roll those soft costs in.
so I would normally agree with you. And that, I mean, look, I'm leaning strongly towards supporting the resolution, right? But it does feel like, to me, like what actually happens is we pass this resolution and staff takes it as sort of direction that that's what we're going to end up doing. It builds momentum. And by the time we get there, That's really the plan. Because all along, it's sort of like what I was trying to get to with the negotiations with the water district, is that it's really hard to say no when the plan has already been said, this is what we're going to do. And so that's...
Well, let me try to give you a little bit of assurance that that's not the way we view it at all, frankly. And our partners, our non-Palo Alto partners are, believe me, more adamant on this than you probably even are. And that is, let's use, we have $3 million a year approximately that we call minor capital. And one reason, see that zero on the board, the only zero up there? So the reason you don't see a design cost on that one is because we've used our minor capital on the design costs there, as our partners, including Palo Alto, would want us to do. And we don't anymore want to leave, frankly, any of that $3 million budgeted amount on the table anymore. Everybody wants us to maximize this, call it pay-as-you-go, call it using the minor capital for design and soft costs. We will be maximizing that because that's what everybody wants us to do. And you can call us on that each year. You can ask us how much of your minor capital did you leave on the table that you could have spent and avoided spending, increasing a bond amount. But that's really all we've got. We've got a very small, currently shown as negative reserves in this wastewater treatment fund. So that's not much of an option. And the partners have not wanted to put money into reserves that are held by Palo Alto. So we really, that's not much of an option. The option that we have and that we're going to use is to use as much of this minor capital money as we've got, $3 million a year approximately, on these soft costs. So that is our motivation. Our motivation is not to try to roll it into these bonds, because that increases everybody's costs over the long haul. That's not what any of our partners want.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. So I thought the discussion of the outfall line construction was interesting, actually. We got any idea what the magnitude of other sea level rise related costs is likely to be over the next 20 or 30 years? And this goes back, well, I mean, yeah, okay, I understand, right? It goes back to the chair's point about, is this the kind of thing we ought to be saving for now? Because where we shouldn't be is in a situation where, 30 years from now, we got to spend some vast amount of money, and all our partners don't want to do it, right? And that means we have to spend too much of it ourselves, right? So.
Yeah. And we raised this with the partners, including ourselves. A few days ago, Brad and almost everybody here was at our partners meeting, and Jamie raised this again and said, look, we haven't been building up reserves in the treatment fund. There's several reasons why one would want to do that. Lowering bond costs, getting ahead of the curve, not having to once again come up with a huge amount of money X years from now. And, it was sort of deer in the headlights for most of them that weren't thinking about that. But we've initiated the conversation of saying, look, something's got to change. The federal government and the state government 50 years ago gave grants to build sewage treatment plants around the United States. Nobody thought ahead like you were suggesting, Greg, and said, okay, this thing's going to wear out in 50 years. What the devil are we going to do? Better start a fund. No, nobody thought of that. I think what we were thinking, and I have to admit I was alive at that point in time. You were not alive. And I think the popular wisdom was the feds will come through again. They built these plants all across the country, 87.5 federal and state money, and they'll do it again when these plants wear out. And then a decade and a half later, whenever it was, the Fed said, you know what, we're out of that business. We're not going to be giving money away. And nobody reacted to that by, or very few at least, by setting up funds. And that's just the reality we face.
So are we talking, you think it's like, is it $50 million? Is it $250 million? Is it $1 billion? What are we looking at?
Well, our long-range facility plan that Brad alluded to was $250 to $300 million to get us back even from 50 years ago. And so one can assume in present dollars, it's roughly the same again. 250, maybe 300. San Jose has said that the current amount for their sewage treatment plant is $2 billion, as you may have heard. I have no idea where they're going to get $2 billion. I don't think they do either. Do they, Ed?
So, I think you're right. I mean, I think that if we manage this process by setting up a fund now, it will be manageable over time, just like our pension obligations and other. If we do nothing, it'll be a crisis. And so, I don't know, I mean, hopefully our partners see it that way. If they don't see it that way, it might be worth having joint council study sessions to have that discussion so we can talk about why they don't see it that way.
That's a great idea, and I think you're absolutely right. After witnessing their response at the staff level last week, I think we need to bump this issue up.
Any further questions, Councilmember Tanaka or? No. Councilmember Philseth or Ku?
No, thank you.
All right, so I'll move that we pass the resolution, that we adopt a resolution declaring intention to reimburse expenditures related to the 4 capital projects from the proceeds of the bonds issued by the city for the wastewater treatment fund. Okay, all in favor? And that passes unanimously with Councilmember Tanaka absent. No, is he here?
No, I'm here.
You're here, okay. Is that a yes vote or a no vote?
Yes, vote.
Yes vote, okay. That passes unanimously. All right, now on to the discussion and recommendation of the City Council to approve the Chamber's audio-visual phase design upgrade approach. And we've never seen this issue before, have we? You need a break? Okay, Councilmember Ku has asked for a 5-minute break, so let's be back in 5 minutes.
We're in the kitchen, so we're all here. Doesn't work that way.
All right, Nielsen, if you want to come up and.
I slept through the council meeting last night, but I did my pilgrimage here for the last some odd hours. My qualifications to talk about this topic is a 74-year-old man with diminished hearing and failing eyesight. So I like this project a lot. But really, more seriously, I think the issue is the council's goal of an involved, informed public, and behind that is the general trust in what government does, and that's the really big picture that I see that's really behind this project. Anything you can do to make meeting effectiveness better, I'm all for it. I'm sure the staff report has got all the bells and whistles and considerations. I'm not here to even talk about any of the technical things. I scanned it. It looks good to me. I can't comment on where this fits in the overall priorities, and I'm not going to make any recommendations. I have no idea of all the other priorities and how it fits there, and that's what you get paid the big bucks for. But to the degree I know lots of people may look at this, and I can imagine the comments that would be coming from the public, I'd be glad to interfere with some of those by trying to broaden my fellow residents' view on some things like this. But I think you really have got an important thing, not for my hearing and eyes at all, but for the other reasons I stated. You really need to have the most modern communication capability for people that are in the chambers and those of us that watch it from home. It's really hard, in my opinion, to track what's going on. The sound system pickup is not great. Graphics display is not anything close to what we have in this small room. So go forth and do right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nielsen. All right, staff, you're up.
Great, thank you very much. Jonathan Reichenthal, IT Director. We're going to be presenting a cross-department approach today. We're coming back to give you a presentation that reflects the important feedback you gave to us last time. So today we'll be talking about the necessity for this project. Michelle Flaherty is going to take that. We have a staff recommendation. I will be talking a little bit about the technology, and Brad and Beth will weigh in too, and we have Joel Dino here, the overall project manager, and then we'll conclude with any discussion you have. So with that, we will progress to the project necessity.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Michelle Flaherty, Deputy City Manager. When you take a look at this slide about the necessity for this project, you can see that we've really grouped it into three different areas. The first is that the equipment that we're dealing with currently is no longer supported, it's obsolete, and it actually represents some safety risks as well. But there are other issues in addition to that, which include improved community functionality in terms of what the equipment is used for, and the ultimate goal of accountability to the community, communication with the community. And then something that is not readily apparent unless you are drilling down on this is Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, both with respect to things like hearing when you're in the chambers, as well as with the physical layout of the chambers. So those are issues that trigger some mandatory concerns on our part. The other thing I'd like to say about this slide is when you look at the breadth of the issues, it gives you some idea of why you have the group of staff you have before you today. Our project manager, Joel, has been supported by a steering committee on this project that includes your IT director, your public works director, your city clerk, and deputy city manager. So there are a lot of senior executives who have been working on this project to make sure that we're bringing rigor to it, that it's being managed in a thoughtful and responsible way. So with that in mind, let's just talk to you a little bit about the project necessity. This is not just a project for the council. This is a project for the community. And when you think about our council chambers, in addition to supporting the council meetings and some of the committee meetings that you all are in attendance of, I don't think any of us are ever fully aware of how many other community partners are using the chambers, some of them on a routine basis, some of them occasionally. But it touches a lot of different partners in the community. And those folks are counting on the chambers to be a vehicle for community gathering, making space for the community to come in person, and sometimes broadcasting the information online and or over the television as well. So the functionality of the equipment becomes an important issue for a lot of different folks in our community. In addition to members of the Palo Alto community, there are times when Palo Alto is serving as a regional host for regional meetings. And I think that's another important factor that I hope the committee will think about. One of the pictures on this slide is of the select committee that worked on airplane noise. And one of the benefits I think our Palo Alto residents had was that those meetings could have been held anywhere in Santa Clara County, and they were held in Palo Alto. And that gave our residents a lot more convenience in terms of access and participation to those meetings, just in terms of traffic and time. And having a room that facilitates visible presentations, audible presentations, becomes a larger issue in terms of, does anybody want to come here and attend meetings, regional meetings that are being hosted here versus any of the other public facilities in the region. So we just want to remind you of some of the current conditions that we're struggling with and trying to address in this project. The first is the recording limitations in the chambers. And the problems with the quality on the analog recording. This is a picture of what the image quality is like coming off the current equipment in the chambers. And as you can see, the image is not at all sharp. That is exacerbated when we're broadcasting it over television, for example. But this gives you some idea. And to just contrast that, on the next slide, we've got an image from when you all met at the Mitchell Park Community Center, and we were able to use digital recording equipment on site there rather than the old analog equipment in the chambers. And you can see the crispness of the font as well as the imagery that's being broadcast. So we thought that was a nice ability to contrast for you what newer equipment can do and what a lot of other jurisdictions are using now compared to what's in our chambers. In terms of the broadcast booth, it's a pretty miserable facility for our folks to be working in. It's sort of shoebox-like. It's not ADA compliant, and in addition to sort of being unpleasant, we do have some safety concerns.
I just heard it was cold.
That too.
It's too cold to be in there.
Yeah. So it's crowded and it's not well ventilated. So, and again, we've got some safety concerns as well. So it needs an upgrade, but there's some compliance concerns. So beyond just is it suboptimal. And then underneath the dais itself, as you may be aware, if your knees are hitting it, we've got the cords and the wiring challenges, which are not just an inconvenience, but in terms of being able to sit there, but it's the wiring that's actually prone to failure. And so we've got staff actually crawling on their hands and knees occasionally during meetings, trying to make real-time repairs when things are going wrong. In terms of the voting system, the repair parts are no longer available. Our contractor was venting to us, I think maybe a year ago when we were in the early stages of this project, about how he had to go on eBay to get replacement parts because no vendor actually carries them anymore. So it really is at the point where it's being held together by sort of chewing gum and string.
I actually heard that Councilmember Crew will not be able to vote for the rest of the year.
You're seeing it and feeling it at your meetings, but there are all these other elements.
Trying to find replacement parts so I can vote again.
The other piece we wanted to bring to your attention, because I'm not sure you all see this when you're facing forward at the council meetings. I will tell you because I sit in the audience and face you all. It is fairly routine now, more often than not at your council meetings, that sometime late in the evening, one of our contractors will have to discreetly walk behind the wall, behind you all, drag a chair over, climb up on the chair, and fiddle with the camera to try to adjust it in real time. And he's He's climbing on a chair. He doesn't have a spotter. Again, we've got safety concerns about that practice, in addition to just the impracticality of that this is what we've been reduced to. This picture was taken last night, but this was not a one-off. This is, more often than not, this is happening during the council meetings.
And just in case someone's listening, to interject, since I shot this photo last night, it's actually not a camera. He was unplugging a camera. The camera's not back there, as you might imagine. That's not a good angle. But that said, he was unplugging a camera that was frozen. So he had to reset it and then plug it back in to get it to restart.
And that's fairly routine. As we've discussed with you in the past, the rear projected screen system is pretty antiquated, so the display is poor quality. It's giving mismatched sizes in terms of what's broadcast. During the day, the glare from the windows makes it very hard to see the screens. You can see the photograph on the right, which shows the reflection of the lights in the room on the screen. And, you know, the example that really came home to me on this was in October, when we invited folks from SFO down to do the presentation on the GBAS landing system. And they brought a regular PowerPoint presentation, and no one in the audience could see what was on the screen. And so the presenters were sort of frustrated because they were giving a presentation that no one in real time could see. And we were saying, well, we're going to post it on our website and you can all download it tomorrow. And it's sort of not a very good reassurance that you can download tomorrow, but what's being presented in real time that nobody can see. So lastly, the rear projection room is I have never poked my head in there, and I was shocked when I saw this photograph. I mean, the floor is actually sloped, so when a technician does have to crawl in there, it's a pretty unsafe structure and pretty suboptimal. So the situation is what I would describe as dire, and we've got a plan.
We do, and just before we go there, Beth, did you like to say anything about the condition of the equipment in addition?
No, I think Michelle's pretty
Okay.
much covered it, and the pictures show really well what is going on in there and how it is not user-friendly. And for the public, it does not give them a good experience. And one of my concerns, too, is the ADA, is that we can't help people who have hearing disabilities, limited hearing, with our meetings. And to be able to see things up on the screens, the public just cannot read them, even our presentations. So it's pretty bad.
Thank you very much. So I'll start with the staff recommendation, and then we'll just drill into what's included in this. Your guidance when we last met with you was a number of things, certainly to see if we could eliminate unnecessary items and reduce the cost. You also asked us to look at phasing it, so we didn't have to spend all the money at once, or we could do like the necessary phase one and then consider additional phases later. So we're going to show you this idea of doing it in a total of 3 phases and doing 1 and 2 together, and then a third if you like that option. And that's the recommendation we'll be looking for. I believe it aligns directly with your recommendations. So what is included? So phase 1 would be, and it's we got both a picture here and a description of the things that we've included. What you don't see here is preparation costs, labor, the build out. So you just get the sort of technology. The screens that you use at the dais would be replaced with larger screens. They would be touch screen. You would vote from them. You'd control your, the democratic functions you use directly from that screen. We would deploy ADA compliant wireless assistance technology, which right now we're not in compliance, so that's important, including then also installing a new lectern to replace the existing one that would be ADA compliance. And you can see there also the speaker timer, which is not in great shape as well, would be replaced. So that, when we looked at the technologies, we also grouped them by things that were logical to have together. Basically, you're seeing here from the vendor and our input what the minimum is. So you wouldn't really pull anything out of this because it wouldn't make sense. Actually, it would cost you more in the medium term to long term. This phase, although it's not written on the slide, this is we've included, of course, the labor costs, but also some contingency costs that would be around $250,000 if we just did phase 1. What I want to point out now is what Phase 2 would look like, which is a larger, more ambitious piece of the project. This would include upgrading the broadcast system and what we've been calling Jurassic Park, which we showed you pictures of today. That is apparently cold right now, but also just very, very difficult for two people to sit in with old technology. So that would include building out a new room with HVAC. It would be ADA compliant again, and all the electrical system technology to go with that. So this is a big part of the technology. It gets us a long way to addressing many of the things that both Michelle and Beth spoke about. Phase 2 is, again, with labor and rounding up for contingency, $750,000. So what you'll see later is our recommendation is we do Phase 1 and Phase 2, which is $1 million. Now moving to what you could argue is slightly more discretionary, but staff is recommending that we do Phase 3, but potentially later, maybe a year later. This would include improving the audio equipment overall, and this would include now new screens. And I'll show you a picture in a moment how the screen is significantly improved in terms of what we can actually show. We would also have to install things like a better lighting system to accommodate the new cameras, better AV control system. There's a couple of things that are interesting about the room in terms of lighting that we think are highly desirable to do, and frankly, probably important if we're going to get the best experience, considering we're spending this money, is to reduce some of the light coming in. And the way in which we would do that is, first of all, to shade the sun, the skylight items in that room. They would have glare reduction, and we would have shades for all the windows. I'm anticipating a question here. I'll just answer it. There was a question of the motorized shades, and that we were wondering, is that too elaborate? Is it really necessary? The first thing is they actually are not that much relative to the whole order. We think it's about $8,000. But the actual manual act of pulling down the shades and increasing them, first of all, it would put wear and tear in it, but it would be a big delay, and it's disruptive. It's ugly, and so this is something actually we don't think is that discretionary. I think it's an important piece of it to make it work right.
So what's the rear glass wall? You're going to address that? For some reason, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I remember, actually, I'll show you the slide. If you look, it is that. Behind that, very few people have seen what's behind that screen is this, right? And so we would actually fix that. We would fill it in. So it's not, we potentially could use it for like a storage room or something, but it actually would reduce the danger of that room. You have to put a strap, you have to actually strap yourself with like a climbing gear when you go in there. Otherwise, you could slip and go through the glass.
How do you get in there? From the front? How do you get in there from the?
There's a doorway that is accessible through the HR department.
So the projector's in there?
Yeah.
So by filling it in, what's the value of filling it in?
Well, we take the glass away, and when I say filling in, I think what we mean is actually make it a wall.
Yeah, but what's the value of that? I mean, just looks better, or, I mean?
Well, we would also, for example, the slant, I think we would get rid of. So, because right now, it's not usable, we could actually lock the door and never have it accessible. But if we wanted to use it as a city facility, we have to make some modifications to it, otherwise it's dangerous.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Are we going to use it as a city facility? And we're going to put a wall there and you access it from the other side? Or, I mean, I'm confused as to what we're doing.
Internally, I think it's an attractive nuisance in terms of the structure of the room. Externally, we want to do the covering up, filling in the wall. We're not talking about filling in the entire open space. We're talking about filling in where the glass is, so that you no longer have that glass, because we would be installing new screens. So when you install the new screens, you get rid of that window, essentially.
All right, so the screens would go.
Yes.
So the screens would go there. That's what you mean by filling. Right, so the screens would be behind the dais, which I assume, so they would, instead of the glass wall there, you'd have a screen there. Is that?
No. So I have the picture up here. We would be filling in this glass, which is the existing screens.
Right.
And when we say filling in, again, making it just flush, so it looked nice. Otherwise, you're left with this forever. Also creates safety. The new screens that we propose are actually suspended over the dais, and we'll show you a picture of that in a moment. It does move it, so it's actually easier to see from the entire community audience. Right now, there's a lot of issues with actually seeing the screen. Is that right?
How often does somebody How often in practice does somebody have to put on the harness and go back there where the projectors are?
We also, we replace bulbs, we have to replace the focus on it. Maybe, it's quite regular.
Was it once a week or once a month or?
Maybe once a month. It depends on if there's an issue with the screens themselves and the projector. Also, the bulbs that are back there are, I want to say, about $1,000 each. And so they do have to have a certain person be able to go in there to replace them. But it might be maybe once a month at the most.
Okay, thank you for that. This picture actually shows a reasonable view of what the new screen positioning would look like, very accessible by the entire audience.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of the screen itself, this is a requirement. It will be sharp, clear, 3 independent screens can be shown on that large screen behind the dais. So that will completely support that for presentations, motions, and then other speaking. For example, a list of the speakers. Okay, so that gets us then, just as a summary slide, to the 3 potential phases. You can see the cost here and what's included for each. We would be proposing that both Phase 1 and Phase 2 could be done together in FY20, and then we'd follow that on, if you recommended it, with Phase 3 in a subsequent year. The last thing I just want to say, again, about the $1,750,000 is $150,000 of that is available through ADA funds. The remaining is part of the.
Can you say it again?
The $150,000 of that is already available from ADA funds, and the remaining amount is already available through the tech fund. So this money is available should you choose to use it.
All right, well, I thought that was a great presentation. Fantastic job. I actually really enjoyed it, and I thought it really laid it out. So, I had a couple questions that I wanted to ask first. What are we not doing? It looked like we decided to do the motorized blackout shades from Phase 4 anyway, right? Or was those different motorized blackout shades? So they're different ones?
Yes. They could be layered together.
Do you want to?
So basically, just so I have it in my head, originally this was going to be $2,040,000, right? We've got it down to $1,077,550, and we're cutting out the following things. So the first things I want to know is, what are we cutting out? So we're cutting out the KZU radio desk. So what does that mean from a community perspective? I mean, Vince is back there, right? And he's, a lot of the community listens on the radio, I would say. No, you don't think so? No, no one listens on the radio. I was going to say, I do too. That's why. I thought,
There are some, but there's no way to quantify how many people actually listen to the radio. We also did a survey of city clerks within the state of California, and out of the 30 or 40 that responded, only 2 do a radio broadcast.
Okay, but we're Palo Alto, and we have 8 libraries. Everyone else has 1. I probably made the library number bigger. But the point is that I'm not sure that, the question is will the radio desk still be there, or are we getting rid of Vince, or does he just have an antiquated desk, or is the desk perfectly fine? And why, and I guess I'm going to ask questions like, why did we originally think we should do the desk? We don't think anymore. And the fair answer would be because council tried to cut this. So, I mean, that's a fair answer. We still think it's a good plan. We still think we should have done it, but council didn't wanted to cut that. So before we make the decision not to do this, I just think we need to think through it in a systematic way and decide, is it really worth it, and have that discussion. So it's not like, well, why aren't you doing it? Because I know that we're the ones who have been extremely difficult and have been suggesting that we cut this, and it's not staff, and I think staff has done a really good job on this, and I want to get that out there first. So this is all on us. So when I ask these questions, it's like, well, Greg, you're the one who told us to do this. Like, what are you thinking? So I want to acknowledge that first. So I guess I just want to understand first on the desk is, what do we think about the desk?
His desk is old and antiquated too. Looking at it from the staff side, that it was, his equipment is also analog and antiquated. So if we decided to include it in the project, it would have, we would have to bring back, I don't know how much it is for that.
Well, I assume it's no more than
but-
250,000 to do all these things, because we were at, or 300, because we were at 2,040,000.
Yeah.
Right, so I mean, I assume it's somewhere in that. I'm just trying to understand what the community is not getting in terms of transparency, accuracy.
No, go
Are we basically making decisions that we are no longer going to have the radio broadcast long-term? If so, that's something I want to note. I'm voting to get rid of Vince's broadcast over the long term. I mean, I sort of want to have a sense of what we're actually, what decisions these mean.
Yeah.
Yes, so the whole broadcast would go.
Okay,
It's
so-
not just the desk, it's the function of broadcasting over the radio, because we would be removing that function out of it if we did this cut. The, part of what we viewed as an alternative to that is the live streaming is available, you know, on a mobile device. So if I'm driving home from the meeting.
You can live stream.
I can live stream on my mobile device, throw it on the passenger seat and listen, even if it's not coming through on my radio.
So can you break it out quickly what the KZU radio desk is?
We can look it up, if you want to stand by.
I mean, yeah, we can move on and we can just get back to you on that.
When I find it, I'll.
Okay,
Yeah, so just pipe up.
we'll come back. Yeah.
And so, okay, I understand that. So we're getting rid of Vince. That's what this is about. If we cut the radio desk, Vince goes.
So what is the difference between the radio broadcast and the live stream? Is that you got somebody doing commentary and so forth? And
That's
right,
nice.
Right? So what's the difference between
That's a good
somebody,
question.
I mean, if you wanted somebody doing a commentary on this and saying this and that and the other thing, I mean, you guys who listen to it, I don't listen to it, right? So you guys, I mean, tell me, right? What's the difference between somebody in a booth in there versus somebody sitting in the media center, you know, watching on live stream, commenting on it from there?
Okay. So keeping Vince is $12,000?
You heard that.
Yeah,
I did hear that. So
that's
keeping
not a lot
Vince
of
is
money.
12 So we're putting the price on Vince up $12,000.
I want to say something too. You know, on the KZSU, that desk, there's also a telephone in there that is hot wired to the KZSU over at Stanford. So in case of emergencies over here, OES can, or somebody, you know, the emergency council, whomever, actually can pick up the phone and call up over there so that they can continue the announcements of whatever emergency there is. So in a way, I think that we need to kind of take a look at that too.
Well, I think that's a really good point, Councilmember Coe. It's a safety issue in some ways. So then we move on to the audio-video integration links via network to 3 libraries and media center. I don't know what that means.
That would, so we have equipment in most of the sites, and when the new libraries were refurbished, we put in audiovisual equipment. We could have an event at a downtown library or Mitchell Park, and it could broadcast in the equipment here and vice versa. So it allows us to share audio and video across multiple facilities at the city if we'd like to do that.
So
It
what,
could also function as an overflow in case we have a large event here and people in the other communities.
so we have the little library next door to the city hall. So if we had a big event and you wanted to do an overflow, by putting these in, you could overflow there, or you could overflow to Mitchell Park if people didn't want to drive that. So we could do that, right?
Yeah.
And we'll lose that capability by not doing that.
Or like a satellite town hall meeting structure where people can.
Or they could be anywhere in any of our libraries
Correct.
throughout the city.
Participate.
Correct.
That's actually really cool to be able to do that.
And if we lost the ability to have a council meeting here in this building, we could go to the libraries or Mitchell Park and have it broadcast from there to any one of these locations. So if there was a major disaster within the city, any citizen could go to those locations and see what council's doing.
Don't we overflow to out here sometimes?
We do.
That's built in. This would extend from there to these other facilities.
So would it make a difference if we wanted to hold a council meeting in one of these other facilities? Would that make it easier as well, or not? Or is that not?
You can currently stream, like we can stream now from Mitchell Park
Right.
to the broadcast, but not to this facility. This is connecting the facility to facility.
So we could have it in Mitchell Park and then broadcast to here for people that actually wanted to be in the chambers for whatever reason.
With this, you could.
With this, you could.
Yes.
That's correct.
And what does the audio-video integration cost?
$78,000, correct? Here, 78,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that the full cost? It appears to be $78,000.
Okay. And so now, we had,
Do you want to talk to that?
If I could borrow this for a second.
Okay.
Brad Eggleston, Public Works Director. I just wanted to add the figures that we're giving for some of these items that are not included are figures that don't include general conditions and contingencies, which add
10%?
about 55% to those costs.
55%.
So if we're saying 80,000 or so for the audio-visual integration, it's probably more like
So
120,000.
why does it cost, why do you have, what are the general conditions and, I mean, if we're doing the project anyway, why is the general conditions more?
It goes up when the total goes up.
General conditions are things like contractor, profit and overhead, costs of bonds, cost escalation. It's all those things rolled up, and what we're using here is about 34%. And then also included is 20% for design and construction contingency. So what that means is because we're at such an early level of design, we know that costs will increase. And then, of course, as usual, when we have a construction contract, we typically have a 10% contingency.
Okay, so basically these numbers we should include, they're $20,000 instead of 11. Okay.
Yeah, you could kind of
I
just.
thought it was getting a little low because I was trying to figure out how we're going to get to 250. I had like,
With shades.
boy, those reduction in film, the glare reduction film is super expensive. So, getting back to the chambers on the glare reduction, you talked about the blackout shades. How, I'm confused to what we would use with glare reduction. Where would that go if we have blackout shades? Or am I, and where are the motorized blackout shades? How does this all work?
It's skylight versus all the other windows.
So what is going to be the user experience without the glare reduction film and the motorized blackout shades on that? Is it going to be, I mean, harder to see? Is it, we're going to spend all this money and it's not going to be crisp and sharp? You know, I mean, what are we not getting that we're going to say, okay, that was really stupid?
It's going to be subjective a little bit, the answer to this. It's marginal. So with the recommendation we're making, you get a very good experience. With the total blackout, you get the, I mean, you get the optimum. You have total control over the room with lights and faders, and you know, we've never had to use that in a context we use this council chambers. But you know, when you are a audiovisual designer, as this company has been, they want to always give you the absolute best experience, or the ability to attain the best experience, even if, you know, ultimately it's unlikely we need the total blackout, right?
Well, I mean, you could have the most glorious experience ever, okay? But in practice, the only reason you're ever going to do these things is to dim the room so you can see the screen better, right? So that's the one application for this, right? So how optimal do we need to be?
It's actually two applications as I understand it. It's the folks in the room being able to see the screen, which is sort of the intuitive one for, I think, lay people like myself. The other that I learned about was our camera techs were saying for the quality of the broadcast, they want to be able to dim so that the lights are the source of the light as opposed to the windows. And that they argued that made a considerable difference on the quality of the camera work that they do as professionals.
That's actually a really important point, one I never would have thought of. So the user experience for the public in viewing this will be significantly different.
In terms of the visibility through the broadcast, according to
That's
our
what I mean,
camera
through the
tech
broadcast.
folks, yes.
Right. But I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this is, okay, I have a confession to make. So I went and watched all of the, interviews for the PTC. It was a miserable experience.
That's in here.
Yes, it was a miserable experience. So, and that's in here, right? And the quality in here is better, right? So I'm assuming that we will have better quality than we have by doing that than we have in here, right? Because it was horrible. I mean, some of you couldn't even understand what you said, by the way. I mean, it was like the microphones weren't picking it up, and it was really, you have your head down the entire time.
Some of
this aerial view.
some of us actually look better in standard definition than high definition.
So I do want to say that. I do think that that's an interesting point. Okay, I now understand what we're getting, what we're not getting. So my next point is this, and I realize this was council direction, but I am asking myself, what is the value in our council direction on this? So we've basically said, let's look at phasing. We have the money now, it's in the technology fund and that other fund. So the money's now. I hear over here that by phasing it, we run the risk of cost escalation. And we don't have the benefits of having it now. So I have no understanding, and if anyone else wants to jump in on that, I'm happy. I see absolutely no benefits in phasing. I can't think of one. And so if anyone has a reason why we should phase this, I would like to hear it.
I think the general public might like it if we phased it, just so that they can see that we're actually making sure that we have appropriate funds as we go along.
So we have the funds now.
I know we have the funds now. but I
So
think-
that means that
I also understand phasing it is sometimes starting all over again. When you start a project, you want to kind of follow through and finish up so that you don't have to clean up and all that. But I don't know how the general public feels.
I think that's our job as council members to educate them. I think as Nielsen said, we have to explain to the general public that if we phase it, it is likely to cost them more, and they get worse service, and we have the money now, and it is for the benefit of the public, because they will have a better experience, and it'll be more open, more transparent, and we will be able to communicate with the public in a much better way. And so I, for one, think that the phasing idea is silly, and I do think that we need to do a better job with our public in explaining it and being clear about why we are doing things in that way. And so I would recommend that we do the entire project and move forward with the entire project, as opposed to this artificial phasing, which will cost us all more. And my actual belief in watching construction projects is stopping and starting. You start more in the general conditions, your people, they have to restart up, and there's startup costs, and you break it into two separate projects, the overhead and the profit's more because they have to do stuff. And so I actually think it's a really silly concept. So I don't know, when we get to it, I'm open to discussion on it, obviously, but I do think we should just do the whole thing if we're going to do it. And then I think we need to make decisions about what is the right thing on Phase 4. Are we saying we don't want Vince? Do we think that, well, I mean, that's the choice. I mean, it's a choice about, do we want Vince or not? Do we want KZZU, and, maybe saying Vince is a shorthand. Do we want a KZZU radio broadcast, or do we want some sort of streaming that people can do, which is a totally different experience? And I don't think we should make that decision without knowing that that's the decision we're making. And then I, for one, think we should definitely do the audio-video integration. I think it's silly not to. I think it's a functionality that'll be really helpful for the community. And we're doing this, I don't know, how long do you think this thing lasts? I mean, we've had the last one for, 30 years?
It's definitely a multi-decade investment, yes.
So, I'll also point out that we spend money on doing some study here and there all the time in planning that sits on the shelf and no one ever looks at and costs $250,000. And so if we're going to routinely approve those kind of studies, because we think we should for some reason, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying the extra costs of this stuff to do it right seems to me to be the right thing to do. And I recognize, and I think we've done a good job. I think we have been very thoughtful. We've looked at different options here. But at the end of the day, and I don't know about the glare reduction film at the windows or the motorized blackout shades. I feel much more strongly about the first two, frankly. I probably would do them mostly because, and I was leaning against doing them, mostly because I think, I'll tell you, when I watched those videos, it was painful, whereas I could probably watch YouTube videos at a high definition for hours. And the ability to have your interest held by something that is much better definition is so much easier than having to watch a grainy image in which it's really hard to keep your interest. And so if we really want the public's involvement, I think we should give them the best experience. And I don't mean like, I think the costs involved here, given the city budget and given that we actually have the money, is a minor issue in the scheme of things. And so I, for one, would probably do all of it, but I would definitely do it the first three phases now, and I would definitely do the audio video integration, then I would do the KZU radio desk, and then I would probably do the glare reduction and the motorized blackout shades. But I wanted to open that up to you guys.
Well, I'm not sold.
I know you're not.
Right? I mean, I like the phase thing for a couple of reasons. One is, some of this clearly has to be done right away. So if the voting system is broke, okay, and can't be fixed, I mean, we need to fix that, right? And it's not that much money and so forth. If we're out of ADA compliance, then we got to deal with that, okay? I mean, that's basic, okay? Some of this other stuff, could we get a couple more years out of it? Yeah, probably could. Yeah, I get that it doesn't, I mean, I would put a higher priority on making it sound better than look better, okay? If you can't understand it, okay, that's a problem, okay? On some of this other stuff, we're talking about there's a cognitive problem here for me, which is, we're going to be able to broadcast this stuff to your phone, okay, to your laptop, okay? I'm sure if I go home and I get my laptop and connect it to my TV, I can see it on my TV and so forth. So how it is that we need another couple $100,000 to show it in the library somewhere? That makes no sense to me. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for it, but it's just totally counterintuitive, right? So I actually kind of like the phasing, because I think some of this is more important than others. Again, yeah, okay, we got some money, okay, that's fine, okay, that's fine, okay, we got some money, okay, but, and if we had no other priorities than this, okay, and no history buildings and, none of this other kind of stuff, then yeah, of course, go for it, right? But in the real world, we got to balance this stuff, and we all know that some of this stuff is fungible, and we are going to have other technology costs besides this and so forth. So it's not obvious to me to say, oh, let's do this, let's all do it at once, right? That doesn't seem conservative to me.
So this raises the question of, in the technology fund,
You're telling me there's going to be no technology in the police building, for example?
well, I assume the fund gets bigger every year, too.
It does, yes.
So the question is there any competing priorities or is the money, if the money's just going to sit there while we wait for the phasing, it's a bad decision. If you're saying there are competing priorities that we should do, then maybe that's a different question. So are there competing priorities?
So this money is set aside for this? Yeah.
That didn't really answer the question.
Okay.
Jonathan, I think,
Yeah, sorry.
I think the question is there another project that's not being funded that would be funded by these funds if we didn't spend them on this project?
Not in the current technology roadmap for the city. Now, that could change in a year or two or three, but
We don't have anything coming along that we could pay as you go, so we don't have to do bond issues and all this kind of stuff that we just talked about in the last session.
So I'm talking specifically to the IT department, the things we support under my purview, not outside of that.
No ERP replacements coming along in the future.
Cancel the ERP.
For now, right?
But those funds are allocated in the tech fund as well. So that's not competing, that is available fund.
Any other questions, thoughts? Besides not being sold?
So when you went up to the 2 million, what was added back in there? The blind out the Phase 4, which is the blind, the shades.
No, there's the four
Are those
things.
like these ones over here? Right, these, okay.
So let me be clear about what our options are. Our option is to do the Phase 1 and the Phase 2, and then move and do Phase 3 at a later date.
That's the staff recommendation.
Yes.
I would say that's what staff came forward. I'm not sure staff actually believes that's a good choice. That was what council asked them to look at, a phasing thing. Then Phase 4 is, and we can ask them, I mean, but in Phase 4, they suggest that we don't do to save the $250,000. So we can decide to do exactly what the staff has set forth in here, Phase 1 and 2, then do Phase 3. And then we can not do anything in Phase 4. Or we can do Phase 1, 2, and 3 all together and do nothing in Phase 4. Or we can do Phase 1, 2, 3, and all of Phase 4. Or we can do Phase 1, 2, 3, do the KZU radio desk and not do the rest of it. You know, obviously, we can add any of these four things in. I'm not quite clear about adding in, you know, the glare reduction film at windows without the motorized blackout shades or the blackout shade. We could have a discussion if people wanted to about that. But that seems to me our choices of what we should do. And I guess I'm looking to see if you're right where the staff recommendation is, or if you think we should do, hey, Phase 1, 2, and 3, but nothing in 4, or, you know, I'm sort of soft on the Phase 4 stuff, to be honest, but I definitely think we should do Phase 1, 2, and 3 together. I don't see the argument not to do that, frankly. It costs more money, and it delays the experience for everyone.
Well, I ought to say that, observe too, that construction costs go up over time, technology costs go down over time.
That is possible, but unlikely in this case. But I'll let Jonathan answer that. By phasing it, do you think it'll cost us more or cost us less, or it's impossible to tell?
My understanding, having been educated by Brad, was that in terms of construction, it costs less if you do together. That would be what I could stand behind right now, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really asking if you could do Phase 1, 2, and 3 together.
I'll probably vote against it.
So you can't do that.
I'll probably vote against it.
Why?
Because I'd rather stretch it out, because I think we can live with Phase 3 without Phase 3 for another year.
Okay. How about you, Councilmember Coop?
No, I'd like to pick stuff, actually.
So there's the fourth, that's Phase 4 where we pick stuff, unless you want to
pick out of Phase 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, you want to pick out of Phase 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah. Simply because, I want to kind of look at and ask for your guidance in terms of what are some priorities. For me, the ADA is a priority because we're totally out of compliance, right? And I certainly want to invite.
Phase 1, got to do.
Okay. And then the thing is, our audio system, at least for people at home, I get complaints about that all the time. They're telling me that they can't hear, and I'm not really sure it's because that we're not close enough to a mic, or it's just simply the system itself. So if we can have some sort of understanding there. Definitely when I'm watching at home, when I'm watching at home, I can't see the screen at all. So that's something that possibly people would like to, at home, be able to see the motion that is up on the wall.
Well, that's part of the broadcast system, right? That's not part of the AV, right?
The big improvement
Where
in the
is that?
screens would be Phase 3. You would get that benefit.
Where's the part where you get to see what the slides are and the text and the motion on the screen?
Go ahead.
Right now, the only way to broadcast what's on the screen is for the cameras to actually focus on the screen. And with all the glare and stuff, that's almost impossible. With the updated digital, they can just show that as a separate thing that overlaps.
Would that be possible in Phase 2, or do you have that screen?
That would be part of Phase 2.
Okay, good.
So with the digital upgrades, they could superimpose what's on the screen instead of taking a camera.
have a resolution of the screen inside, right? I think that's.
Why are you guys looking at me? Oh.
You got the floor and I interrupted you.
Oh, you did, okay. So I see so you were going to say something, I'm
I
sorry.
just wanted to, if you didn't mind, comment on one thing that you said, council member, which is the team here went to great lengths to identify the minimum items for each phase. So actually pulling individual pieces out of here, it would be, I think, exceptionally complex, and there are dependencies. So we've actually done a lot of that work.
I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted you to be aware because I think it's an excellent point. We were trying to figure out, based on your feedback, what's the minimum in each phase to get the best results, and what's dependent on each other, and that's the criteria we put this through.
And so, in your opinion, the voting system is the worst right now?
No, Councilor, you have no trouble with the voting system.
Well, I can always raise my hand if we're going to save a few $1,000s, you know? I'm willing to do that. You know, I also wonder if maybe the title can be also something that gets misunderstood, you know, that there may be, are we doing another remodel like what we had done over here, or are we just making an experience much more? And it's not even so much transparency for to provide transparency for a general public, but more of a ease of hearing what we're talking about, reading what's on the screens, and just from at their home being in the council chambers with us in all the different meetings. So maybe technologically, maybe that might be something.
Technological upgrade. Or something, I don't know, what do you call it?
Say most of them, yeah, it's a good point, actually. I mean, most of this is actually not AV. Most of this is associated with broadcast.
Right.
Right. It's really a broadcast upgrade is what
We should
this
call it
is.
the council broadcast upgrade. No, really, I mean, I think the problem is that people think we're gonna put in new carpets and, you know, make the chambers look really nice, and that has nothing to do with this.
So what to do?
Well, I think we get more questions, more.
Well, I, with all respect, I totally thank you guys for kind of going through and making what is minimal. But I guess, again, you know, prioritizing our projects, you know, I think one of the items in Phase 3, the demolition and infill of an existing rear wall, might not necessarily need to be done. Just leave it as is, as long as our technicians doesn't have to climb in there ever again. Is that, does that even, yeah, is that negligible?
While Joel looks up the actual figure, I'd just like to lobby you to think about it as a small portion of the cost. It would be a little bit like buying a new flat panel screen for your family room and leaving the old TV sitting out. It's,
The big TV and the cabinet next to it. That's what it is.
Right.
It's a public art over it.
Commission a piece of artwork up there, or better yet, you know, we could put our city's org chart up there, you know, but something to that end. But one thing I would lobby for is that we need VINs, the KZSU.
So why don't we do that? Let's go
you
through
know.
Phase 4 and see what interest people have in doing any of the Phase 4
I don't
stuff.
have any kind of interest in the blackout shades or that sort of thing.
Joel reports getting rid of the old screen is $3,280 plus the contingency costs.
That's not.
All right, so on the Phase 4 stuff, you want to do the KZUZ radio desk. I do too. But you have no interest in doing the ability to do the audio links to the other facilities?
At this time, no. I mean, you know, yeah, I don't think we need to do it right now.
And you don't have no interest in doing the glare reduction film or the motorized blackout shades, which would give a better quality to the video? That's only $5,000 to $8,000? So the glare reduction film and the motorized blackout shades are $5,000 to $8,000?
And we need both?
Well, in phase 3. So in phase 3, they're integrated. There's a,
Oh, I see, it's here.
they're both mentioned in phase 3 and phase 4.
Yeah.
The blackout one is in phase 4 to really optimize broadcasting capabilities and be able to get good results during daytime meetings.
If I'm not mistaken, the glare glass cover is for the skylights up in the ceiling, so that during the daytime, when that does come down, it does provide a lot of glare in the room.
I'm trying to remember how much light we get in here, because natural light is kind of nice, and we don't have to turn on lights and save power and all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, I think we need to kind of do a better outreach to the public.
I think so too.
Educate them.
I think we should change the
and
name of
let
what we're
them
doing
know.
to start with. I'm with you on that.
I certainly, I mean, I do feel for all our technicians who have to go through and work on all this. I see David constantly jiggering with the wires and doing something, so, and I really appreciate having him and, you know, everybody who knows technology to get it going. And I really like the guys in the broadcast rooms and at least not having them freeze to death. I see a lady that works with them that wears her coat in the summer when she's in there. So it's, I mean, so we kind of have to be empathetic for people who work to make sure that we have these broadcasts go out well. So I can support 1, 2, 3 and include VINs.
Okay, so we'd support everything but the audio-video integration. Is that correct?
Yeah, I thought that was included in one of the phases.
In phase 4?
Phase 4.
That's so I'd support all
Oh,
of
yeah,
phase
yeah,
4. So
yeah.
So we're supporting all of phase 4, or phase 4 without the audio-video integration. That's what I thought you said.
Well, phase 4 without just KZSU desk, radio desk.
He wants the spiffy blackout stuff too.
You know, I mean, I thought in phase 3 there was the film, the film over the, that's the only thing, right? But it's not the motorized as of yet.
So the motorized would be included in phase
Would be
3.
included.
It's not the blackout one.
It's the difference.
So the difference is you're spending an extra $5,000 to $8,000
Yeah.
to get better quality video and have more control over it. And I mean, are we really not going to spend $5,000 to $8,000 on that?
But phase 4 ends up turning to be, what, 250,000 total, right?
Well, without the audio-video integration, I guess the question is, how much is it without that? That was the biggest expense. That was the big expense.
It's about 350 minus about 120 or something. So phase 4, I think, was 350. And then we subtract approximately about a 140 for the integration, yeah.
Now, wait a second.
Well, that's right. How we get from
Now, wait a second here, okay? No, okay, we're gonna have $200,000 for Vince, okay, and $8,000 versus, I mean, there's.
No, we had
there's
20,000
there's
for
some
Vince.
fu- there's
No,
some
it doesn't
funky-
make sense, so you
there's
guys have
some
to.
funky math in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys have to be more clear what you're doing.
Oh, you know what, not recommended at best time, that bullet is like 150,000.
We're not doing that.
The first bullet.
No, and when we go to council, we've asked a bunch of questions. Well, we need to finish this. When we go to council, we don't need to give we can save money on raises for our CAOs and just spend it on this. I think that would be fine. Beth's looking at me. Beth's like, Greg, you're out. So I do think you're going to need to tell us. Do you not know the answer to that yet?
It is showing us 334,000 without the contingency for those items, plus the Kevlar reinforced dais is apparently on this list.
So maybe that's the expensive part, is the Kevlar reinforced dais, which wasn't on the list here. So without the Kevlar reinforced dais, hey, I'm not going to be there, so I'm voting no on the Kevlar reinforced dais.
I'm already watching and
Yeah. If I may, for the record, in the original estimates for the project, one of the things we had looked at is whether or not the technology would require breaking down and building a new dais. And when that was part of the estimate, then we thought security upgrades would also be a natural inclusion. So we filtered that out as part of our.
But that would explain
sharpening
why the
of
numbers aren't adding up.
That's correct.
And you probably didn't want to talk too much about it, the Kevlar and reinforced dais, so. Okay, so I guess,
We'll only need that if we eliminate parking.
so do we have any agreement amongst the three of us at all? Are we agreeing on Vince, for instance? Are you still a no on Vince? All right, so we have an agreement that we want to add Vince.
I'm fine with the $8,000 for this.
Okay, so I think we have an agreement to do all the Phase 4 stuff with the exception of the audio-video integration, right? And then I think, so we're then moving the Phase 4 stuff into Phase 3 that we agree. Are we agreeing on that? Okay, so at least we have agreement on that. Where are we, you're still a no on, you want to phase this?
I want to phase it.
Okay, so why don't we take a separate, why don't we show, unless anyone, that we've agreed unanimously that Phase 4 to recommend to council goes into Phase 3. And then, do we have so you're a no on, you want to phase it, I don't want to phase it. What do you want to do, Councilman Cook?
You know, with construction costs and so forth, and also the convenience, I think I would rather not phase it.
Okay, so then I'll show it as a 2-to-1 vote against you, if that's okay?
Works for me.
It still goes to council,
Yeah,
so,
no, and that's the
yeah,
recommendation to
yeah,
council.
mhm.
And it'll be, so if we could just, does that make it clear of what we're telling council? You look confused.
Do you guys have what was? Yes.
I know that was sort of.
Yes, that was Phase 4 with everything except the audio-video links.
Right, into Phase 3.
Into Phase 3.
And then me and
and then-
Councilmember Koo think we should do the whole thing at once, and Councilmember Filsath does not.
Tanaka, dude, I need you.
Fortunately, with the old equipment, I disconnected. It was appropriate. All right, with that, I think, can I adjourn the meeting?
Yeah.
All right.
Did you have a vote, or you?
We did vote. No, we did vote. We did it by, okay, you can reflect those as votes unless anyone has a difference.
That was an analog vote.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Meeting adjourned.
So there's dinner in there, and you guys have your next meeting.
Correct.
That we need to find.
Also, just a monumental moment.